Hogwarts, Harley from the Witch Way by author Shimo Nuha Lie. Chapter 1-25. Harley, who chose the witch path, returned to her 11-year-old age and came into contact with powers outside the path. Well, it's time to give the wizarding world a little witch shock. HP plus secret, it doesn't affect if you haven't seen HP or secret. This book assumes that the world before the recovery of the earth is HP, and the recovery is the world of the Lord of Mysteries after the division. This book only writes about HP, and there is no plot to return to the timeline of the Lord of Mysteries yet. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. Chapter 1, Harley of the Witch's Path. Bang! A sudden noise echoed in the quiet storage room. A beautiful girl with black hair and emerald eyes face planted onto a small bed. As she rubbed her head and tried to get up, the back of her head hit the ceiling with a heavy thud. Ow! Harley shrieked, inwardly scolding herself for being so careless and not checking her surroundings while escaping. But when Harley looked around, what greeted her was not a desolate wilderness or an endless sea, but a dark, cramped storage room. The small bed, the daily necessities by the headboard, and a few tattered clothes, everything felt both familiar and strange. "Is this Auntie's house?" Harley murmured, caressing the bed. Harley then buried her face in the pillow, continuously cheering in a low voice, tears streaming from the corners of her eyes. "Haha, I made it back. Mr. Door successfully pinpointed my original world, and he didn't even catch me. Damn Mr. Door, damn Aemon. Sure enough, I'm the ultimate victor. You can't catch me." It was no wonder Harley was so excited. Many years ago, for unknown reasons, Harley inexplicably transmigrated to a strange world. That world actually had legendary extraordinary powers, and there were 22 of them. This made little Harley incredibly thrilled. But with good news comes bad news. The bad news was that Harley accidentally ended up near the stronghold of a force called the Demonist Sect and was taken back to be trained as a genius. Thus, the bewildered Harry embarked on the witch pathway and became Harley. And it wasn't until she became Harley that she realized there were a full 22 pathways to choose from. But Harley's luck was so bad that she just happened to fall into the Demonist Sect stronghold. Harley's treatment in the Demonist Sect was not good. After all, she was just an orphan with no background. So she was often bullied. However, Harley was not one to be easily bullied. When her cousin Dudley bullied her, Harley, despite having no power, dared to make limited counterattacks. And now that she possessed considerable strength, how could she allow herself to be slaughtered? So, Harley successfully murdered a witch who was one sequence higher than herself and frequently bullied her, and stole the potion formulas for the next 2 sequences, along with the method to leave the Demonist Sect stronghold. Finally, Miss Harley Potter successfully escaped the Demonist Sect and was chased all the way, hiding in the Middle East, occasionally even counter-killing. Eventually, Harley even successfully advanced to Sequence 3 Demoness of Unaging, becoming one of the most powerful individuals in that world. Just when Harley thought good days were coming, her wonderful life ended just as it began. This was because the god of war and the goddess of the night initiated a divine war. During the period of the 2 great beings' divine war, many schemers were unusually active, such as a certain monocle-wearing fellow. Aemon sent his avatars to wander around, and one of them happened to discover the otherworldly aura on Harley. So, poor Harley, having just escaped the Demonist Sect's pursuit, was now subjected to Amon's gaze and chase. And this opponent was far more troublesome than the Demonist Sect, practically becoming Harley's nightmare. Finally, a desperate Harley, following the contents of notes she had confiscated from a certain arcanist, sought help from the mad existence known as Mr. Door. Although Mr. Door discovered Harley's difference and harbored ill intentions, wanting to catch this otherworldly visitor while opening the door, Harley was one step ahead and successfully escaped back. Once the excitement subsided, Harley pushed open the storage room door. The sky outside was already faintly bright, but the house was still quiet. Her annoying aunt and uncle hadn't woken up, let alone her pig-like cousin Dudley. However, Harley wasn't planning revenge for now. Although the abilities of a Sequence 9 assassin could make them sleep forever without a sound, and she wouldn't be suspected in the slightest. But Harley wanted to slowly make them experience the pain they had inflicted on her over the years, using the abilities of a witch and instigator to thoroughly enjoy the fun. Of course, considering they adopted her as an orphan, Harley wouldn't kill them. This was the last mercy of a relatively restrained witch. Witches hold grudges, Harley thought resentfully, while checking her physical condition. Indeed, Mr. Door was extremely powerful, capable of pinpointing her original world through an item with an otherworldly aura in her hand. Unfortunately, he was already mad, and also seemed to have a grudge against that scoundrel Eamon, or perhaps they were naturally hostile. So, the two would likely have a fierce battle first, with no capacity to bother with a little ant like her. However, Harley paid a very high price, as Mr. Door was also very interested in other worlds. Thus, Harley was forced to use almost all of her sealed artifacts to stop Mr. Door from acting against her, while simultaneously sealing her own strength to allow herself to pass through the door. Sure enough, Harley couldn't help but wail, "Now I'm only sequence 7, and I've reverted to the form of an 11-year-old girl. Later, I'll have to see if this world has special potions or potion ingredients, otherwise I'll be stuck as a witch forever. I worked so hard to advance to Demoness of Unaging. Longevity and ageless beauty are just gone like that." Immediately after, Harley pulled out a semi-illusory, small box filled with madness and curses from her pocket. This box was the only thing Harley brought back from the other world besides her own strength. Oh, no, there was also the dress she was wearing. Inside the box was a soul fragment. Although she didn't know whose it was, Harley had to thank him. Because Harley initially didn't clearly understand the acting method, only performing to a certain extent. It wasn't until she became a Demoness of Despair that Harley fully comprehended this method. But by the time she reached Demoness of Despair, Harley couldn't bring herself to harm innocent people like other witches. Mostly, she could only bring despair to her enemies, so her digestion wasn't particularly thorough. Therefore, before sequence 3, Harley didn't completely digest the potion for each sequence, and directly consumed the potion for the next sequence. Sometimes, to quickly gain powerful strength, Harley would even directly consume the potion for the next stage, even when she knew it was unsafe. And in this process, which was almost a gamble with her life, many unstable factors and mad wills naturally accumulated, which would have long killed any other Beander. However, Harley was very lucky. All the potential loss of control and madness that could have appeared on Harley were attracted to a broken, madness-filled soul fragment on Harley's soul, so Harley safely reached Demoness of Unaging. It was also thanks to the otherworldly aura from the soul fragment in the box that Mr. Door was able to locate Harley's world and open a door connecting the two worlds. It's amazing. This world definitely has extraordinary power, otherwise why would other soul fragments still be attached to my soul? Harley was pondering the extraordinary power of her world when she heard the mailbox clang at the door. Harley recalled that someone was delivering mail, but it was very strange. It seemed that the person who usually delivered mail never came so early. Of course, it was also possible that Harley remembered incorrectly, as she hadn't heard that sound in many years. Harley walked over and opened the door to check, but the morning street was empty, with only an owl flying in the sky and a letter lying on the doormat, a retro letter made of parchment. Interesting. Harley's lips curved slightly, and she elegantly curtsied, picking up the letter. The moment she picked up the letter, Harley felt an extraordinary power, but it wasn't the power of a curse. After all, witches are skilled at casting curses, so Harley was very confident in that aspect. Judging by the address on the letter, it was indeed her mail, even clearly marking her residence in the storage room under the stairs. However, Harley clearly saw that, Mr. Harry Potter, on the last line of the address had changed to, Miss Harley Potter, when she picked up the letter. Harley couldn't help but lick her red lips, feeling that this world was truly fascinating. She gently closed the door, then quickly pulled out the letter and roughly read its contents. This was an acceptance letter. A magic school called Hogwarts had accepted her, inviting her to attend, and had sent her a list of required books and equipment. Magic. Miss Harley Potter muttered to herself, as she could also cast various dark arts. She just didn't know if the magic in this world was the same as the magic in the world she had transmigrated to. But this seems like a great opportunity. Harley stroked the parchment with her slender fingers, planning her future. Most of my power is sealed now. Although I don't need to consume the corresponding potions and act again, I do need to concoct some potions to break the seal. It seems this world has extraordinary power, and I know nothing about it. Then Hogwarts is the best pathway. After all, it's a magic school, so it should provide me with systematic teaching. With that thought, Harley made a decision. She would go to Hogwarts and have some fun. Chapter 2. This world is truly interesting. Just as Harley made up her mind, a familiar yet strange voice suddenly came from the stairs behind her. Harry, what are you doing? Who are you? Why are you breaking into my house? A thin, blonde middle-aged woman stood at the top of the stairs. She seemed to subconsciously think that the girl at the door was still the familiar Harry. But she felt there was something wrong with her eyes. Why was there a girl standing at the door? And her appearance was so beautiful, full of charm, bearing traces of Lily from back then, but even more beautiful than Lily. Especially those green eyes, which immediately reminded Petunia of her annoying, enviable, and jealous younger sister. Aunt Petunia. Harley's red lips slightly parted, and then she looked at the time on the wall, only to realize it was already past 6 o'clock. Only then did Harley remember a problem she couldn't ignore. Although she wanted to slowly toy with and repay the Dursley family, the fact that she had become a witch could not be concealed. So they would definitely notice her change immediately. After all, they weren't blind. Although Harley had completely accepted the fact that she was a witch and had changed her name. But those ordinary people didn't know. At least Aunt Petunia and the Dursley family in front of her were all ordinary people, and most likely wouldn't accept this fact, so there would definitely be a drastic reaction. Click. Harley lightly snapped her fingers, and a deep, dark black flame abruptly appeared in midair, flickering continuously. As Harley gently blew a breath, the black flame swirling in front of her instantly flew to Aunt Petunia's head. At the same time, Harley gently raised a finger to her mouth, signaling Aunt Petunia to be quiet. But she overlooked the psychological endurance of an ordinary woman. Aunt Petunia screamed in fright and sat down on the stairs with a thud. What's going on? Petunia! Petunia! From the Dursley family's bedroom, Uncle Vernon heard Aunt Petunia's scream and immediately rushed out. But after seeing the black flame dancing around Aunt Petunia, Uncle Vernon also screamed, "Monster!" Then, his gaze moved with hatred towards the bottom of the stairs, and before he could clearly see who was standing there, he casually picked up his slipper and threw it over. At the same time, Uncle Vernon shouted, "Monster, get out of my house!" Harley frowned slightly, and another black flame appeared out of thin air, shooting out like a bullet, turning the slipper into ashes in midair. Seeing this scene, Uncle Vernon finally realized that the target downstairs had the ability to easily kill him, and he broke out in a cold sweat. However, his wife was right beside him, and his son was in the room behind him. So Uncle Vernon barely managed not to fall, but instead pulled hard on the doorknob of Dudley's room behind him, shouting loudly to his son, who had been woken by the screams. "Baby, don't come out. There's a monster outside, people will die." However, Dudley didn't seem willing to listen to his father. Instead, he struggled to pull the doorknob in the room, wanting to open the door and see what the monster looked like. Harley frowned slightly, and with a light snap of her fingers, the black flame above Aunt Petunia's head directly landed on Dudley's bedroom door, instantly burning the door to a pile of ash. Dudley instantly retreated a few steps, falling heavily to the ground. Uncle Vernon, on the other hand, crashed into the railing, his face turning a purplish red. Harley beckoned, controlling the black flame to return to Aunt Petunia's head, while marveling at how effective this cursed black flame was. As long as a target was marked, the black flame would absolutely not spread, it would only burn the target to ashes. At this moment, Dudley also managed to stand up and rushed out of the room, wanting to see what kind of monster dared to destroy his door. But when he saw the black flame circling above Aunt Petunia's head, he let out a miserable shriek, and then Uncle Vernon covered his mouth again. At this point, Uncle Vernon also clearly saw the appearance of the monster downstairs, and then gasped in surprise, covering his mouth. The monster downstairs had beautiful long black hair, emerald green eyes, and a delicate face. She was simply full of charm. But why did she look so much like his nephew, Harry? You are. Uncle Vernon stammered. "Allow me to introduce myself, I am Harley Potter." Miss Harley lifted the hem of her dress, curtsied slightly, and bowed gracefully. "I'm truly sorry, your dear nephew Harry has permanently become a witch, so you'll have to accept this reality." Seeing the Dursley family with wide open mouths, looking disbelieving, Miss Harley crooked a finger. "I think we need to sit down and have a good talk. I believe I have a way to make you accept this fact." Surrounded by black flame, the Dursley family finally agreed to sit down at the dining table and talk. Harley felt a surge of pleasure watching them cower like quails. Indeed, people inherently bow down to stronger power. "How did you learn magic?" Before Harley could ask, Aunt Petunia couldn't help but speak. "You haven't even gone to that school yet, how could you have learned magic and even changed gender?" Harley couldn't help but raise an eyebrow, marveling that Aunt Petunia had forgotten about the black flame so quickly and dared to question her directly. And what did she mean by going to that school? Aunt Petunia's words had a hidden meaning. As for becoming a witch, Harley didn't intend to answer. After all, if she hadn't become a witch, she might have died. As for switching back to the Red Priest pathway, while being hunted by the Demoness sect, how could she have considered so much? Moreover, the Demoness of Unajing's life-saving abilities were so strong, she certainly wouldn't consider switching to a Bishop of Battle. Anyway, Harley had already gotten used to being a girl, although she still felt very disgusted by men wanting something with her. That's not important. From now on, I ask, you answer. A black flame appeared on Harley's fair, slender finger, then spun around her hand. Seeing this scene, Aunt Petunia decisively chose to shut up. How dare you threaten your aunt? Uncle Vernon, however, seemed to have regained his courage, slamming the table and shouting angrily. If we hadn't adopted you back then, you would have starved to death somewhere. Yes, yes. Harley blew a breath at the black flame, easily blowing it forward. Thank you for your upbringing, so you can continue to talk with me here, instead of. Never mind. Anyway, I ask and you answer. As she spoke, a cup on the table instantly turned to ashes. Uncle Vernon recoiled again, obediently closing his mouth. Harley took out the letter and began to inquire, starting with the school Hogwarts mentioned in the letter, and then asked new questions based on the Dursley families, primarily Aunt Petunia's, answers. 2 hours quickly passed, and by the time it was almost 9 o'clock, Harley had pretty much clarified all her questions. This world is truly interesting. Only those with aptitude are qualified to learn extraordinary power. What an unfair world. When Harley finished listening to Aunt Petunia's narration, she suddenly understood why she disliked her. After all, no matter who it is, witnessing their own biological sister enter the world of magic while they themselves are far removed from it, would more or less lead to some darkening of their personality. Love turns to hate, which is understandable, as there are many such perverts among the Beyonders. Of course, understanding is one thing, but forgiveness is another. Chapter 3 There are demigods in this world too. After listening to Aunt Petunia's detailed description, Harley intertwined her fingers and nodded. I think I understand, Harley said thoughtfully. Aunt Petunia, please make dinner first, I'm a bit hungry. Aunt Petunia glanced at the black flames above Harley's head with a hint of fear, then immediately stood up to cook. At this moment, the flames were attached to Harley's long black hair, burning quietly without harming a single strand of her beautiful dark hair. Harley leaned lazily against the back of the chair, looking up at the ceiling, holding up her hands, admiring her slender, delicate fingers. However, in reality, a storm had erupted in Harley's mind, and she was constantly reflecting on what Aunt Petunia had said. Harley expressed regret over her parents' deaths, but she could also understand it. After all, they were outmatched and had made an enemy. Harley could only promise her parents' spirits that if given the chance, she would use the murderer's head to honor them. Besides this, what interested Harley most was the extraordinary power of this world. The extraordinary power in this world was very strange. It seemed that only those with certain aptitudes could obtain this power, and it required complete reliance on learning to acquire it. Unlike the sequence pathway, while much knowledge also needed to be learned later, when drinking a potion, one would more or less gain some ready-made abilities. Moreover, this power was called magic, which seemed somewhat similar to the dark arts that the witch pathway could master, but also somewhat like the abilities that a wizard of the hermit pathway could master. Furthermore, they seemed to have some similarities with the perfected, Wheel of Fortune, and even the White Tower pathways. Considering that her aunt was just an ordinary muggle, and only her sister was a wizard, Aunt Petunia should have known very little information. Therefore, Harley had a premonition that the 22 pathways of her original world could all find corresponding powers within magic. How interesting, Harley secretly licked her red lips. I'm really looking forward to it. Breakfast was served quickly. Harley's cousin, Dudley, had been timidly curled up in his chair, trying to shrink his obese body into a ball. Now he was energized, eagerly looking at the bacon, smoked ham, and bread on the table. However, Aunt Petunia gave him a subtle glare but did not stop him, clearly afraid of angering her nephew, no, her niece, in front of her. But Harley noticed this. She smiled, like a true noble young lady. We are all family, why should you be afraid of me? Hurry and eat breakfast. Dudley didn't notice his mother's gaze at all. Hearing Harley's words, he immediately reached out to grab the bread. Watching Dudley's crude eating, Harley couldn't help but frown slightly. After all, even during her escape, Harley had mingled with the noble classes of various empires, so she was used to seeing elegant people with smiles on their faces. Only when she was alone in the wilderness during transfers would Harley display such ungraceful behavior, but that was also to quickly recover her strength. So now, seeing Dudley being so rude in front of a lady, truly made her uncomfortable. Harley carefully selected a piece of bread that Dudley hadn't touched, paired it with bacon and lettuce, and ate it in small bites, every movement carrying an elegance that seemed to emanate from her very bones. Just then, the doorbell suddenly rang, but Dudley was still eating wildly, as opening the door was usually Harry's job. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia looked at Harley and dared not make any rash moves. Please open the door, my dear Aunt Petunia, Harley said with a smile after swallowing her last bite of food and wiping her mouth with a tissue. Aunt Petunia glanced at Harley with trepidation, then silently stood up and quickly walked over to open the door. However, after opening the door, Aunt Petunia gasped again, and at the same time, an old and kindly voice rang out. "Good morning. You must be Petunia. We corresponded before, but I should still introduce myself. My name is Albus Dumbledore, the current principal of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I am here today to discuss Miss Harley Potter's enrollment at Hogwarts. Please come in." Aunt Petunia's stammering voice rang out, and then an old man strode into the Dursleys' house's living room. By this time, Harley had left the dining table, washed her hands, and was standing upright in the living room. Uncle Vernon, witnessing everything from the dining room, was agape with surprise, as he hadn't seen how Harley had accomplished all of it. The old man strode into the living room, meeting Harley's emerald green eyes. Harley's gaze quickly assessed the newcomer, as she had heard the old man named Albus Dumbledore introduce himself earlier. The current principal of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The old man was tall and thin, with silver hair and a silver beard long enough to tuck into his belt. He wore a robe with a purple cloak trailing to the ground, and high-heeled silver boots with buckles. Behind the old man's half-moon spectacles, a pair of bright, sapphire blue eyes sparkled. The spectacles sat awkwardly on his nose, which was crooked, appearing to have been broken at least twice. But none of that was the main point. The main point was that the old man gave Harley a very dangerous aura. Harley's spiritual premonition was alarming her wildly. Harley would bet her exquisite looks that the old man in front of her was at least a demigod, with one foot already in the realm of mythical creatures. The old man named Dumbledore was also stunned when he saw Harley's appearance, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. Originally, Hagrid was supposed to guide Harry this time, but Harry in the Hogwarts Book of Admittance had changed to Harley. Such a major event, Dumbledore, as principal, could not possibly be unaware of. So Dumbledore, despite his busy schedule, made time to come personally. Although he had anticipated it, Dumbledore was still somewhat shocked when he saw Miss Harley Potter in person. Besides that, he was also stunned by Harley's appearance. After all, Harley's features were already very beautiful, and after taking the witch's potion, they had become even more exquisite, with a significant increase in both beauty and charm. The main point was that Harley's appearance reminded Dumbledore of someone who had already passed away. Dumbledore suddenly felt that he should talk to Professor Snape when he returned, to avoid certain irrational behaviors. "Hello, Miss Potter," Dumbledore said, looking at Harley from behind his half-moon spectacles. "It's good to see you again. The last time I saw you, you were an infant in swaddling clothes. Now you've grown into a beautiful young lady. Thank you for your compliment, Headmaster Dumbledore," Harley said, lifting her skirt and curtsying slightly. "Everything was so natural. You're welcome, Miss Potter. I'm here this time to invite you to study at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry," Dumbledore said with a smile. "Thank you, Principal, for valuing me enough to come personally. Of course, I would be delighted to study at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." As she spoke, Harley made a gesture to invite him in. "Please have a seat and wait a moment, I'll get you some drinks. Would you like black tea or something else?" Meanwhile, Aunt Petunia quickly slipped into the dining room, and then the sounds of Dudley's crude eating quickly disappeared. Dumbledore smiled and shook his head. "Thank you very much, but it's not necessary. We can resolve this matter quickly." With that, Dumbledore sat on the sofa. Harley also smoothed her long dress, her legs together, and slowly sat down. She only occupied a small area of the sofa, her back naturally straight, and her hands placed on her lap. Dumbledore watched Harley's practiced actions, an unknown light flashing in his eyes, then he spoke. "Hogwarts sends teachers to guide new students only to show Muggle guardians who don't understand magic the existence of magic, so that they can confidently allow their children to study at Hogwarts. However, I think Petunia should be aware of the existence of magic. So I'm here today for only two small matters. One is to take you to purchase your school supplies, and the other is to have a chat with Miss Potter to show my concern for you as principal." Chapter 4. Gambling and Misleading, Psychological Warfare Between the Master and the Witch. Harley's eyes didn't change at all, but she recalled the letter from earlier. The letter changed the moment she touched it. The salutation on it changed from Mr. Harry Potter to Miss Harley Potter. Does that mean Hogwarts has been monitoring her? Or was there some special transcendent power, like so-called magic, attached to that letter? "Respected Principal Dumbledore, thank you very much for your concern," Harley replied with a tone that was both girlishly innocent and polite. "By the way, allow me to remind you, staring so intently at a beautiful lady is quite impolite." Dumbledore said with interest, "Thank you for the reminder, Miss Potter. By the way, may I call you Harley?" Of course, Harley replied with a smile, while naturally shifting her hands slightly to cross them again over her lower abdomen. In reality, Harley was making it easier for her arm to subtly touch the box containing the soul fragment. Mr. Dumbledore in front of her clearly had the strength of a demigod. It would be disastrous if he possessed abilities similar to those of the Dreamweaver sequence, allowing him to read her memories. Harley knew that she had once traveled through worlds, and this phenomenon should be extremely rare, which is why even powerful beings like Eamon and Mr. Door wanted to study her. Therefore, Harley would absolutely not allow her secret to be exposed in this world again. Eamon and Mr. Door were big shots, she couldn't afford to provoke them, nor did she have the ability to stop them from discerning everything. However, this old man in front of her probably only had the strength between Sequence 3 and Sequence 4, so Harley was confident she could prevent him from discerning her memories. And the secret lay in that box. Inside the box was a fragmented soul, and it was a soul fragment that had fallen into a state of loss of control and madness. Although most of Harley's power was temporarily sealed, through specific curses and dark arts, combined with direct contact between her body and the box, she could forcibly make this soul fragment take her place in receiving others' memory probes. If the old man in front of her wanted to forcibly probe her soul, it would certainly be very interesting. However, there was still a small loophole in her plan, but Harley was gambling that this loophole wouldn't be discovered. The nature of a witch's madness, a small gamble, yet one that could involve life and death, Harley believed she could win. Harley thought with pleasure, a polite smile curving her lips. However, Dumbledore didn't seem to be preparing to read Harley's memories. Instead, he began chatting with Harley as if making small talk. Harley, you were admitted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry because you possess this talent. Your parents were both students at our school, so from birth, your name was automatically recorded on our school's roster. Dumbledore seemingly casually chatted with Harley, first introducing the school's background, then slowly guiding the conversation towards the direction he wanted. That's truly magical. I'd love to see the roster that automatically records our names with my own eyes, Harley said, having put on white gloves when she arrived in the living room. She covered her mouth with her white-gloved hand, chuckling softly as she spoke. Indeed. Dumbledore nodded. It's fascinating, isn't it? The name of every child who is qualified to attend our school automatically appears on it. What's even more fascinating, Harley, do you know? The first name that appeared on that roster was Mr. Harry Potter, not Miss Harley Potter. However, just this morning, the name on that roster automatically changed back to Miss Harley Potter. Dumbledore's eagle-like gaze, peering through his half-moon spectacles, fixed on Harley. An interesting mistake, wouldn't you say? Harley nodded in agreement. It is indeed very interesting. For such an important magical item to make such a basic error, it definitely needs to be repaired. Harley had already understood that someone at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was definitely monitoring her, or some magic was monitoring her. So, without exposing her secret of having transmigrated, she would have to use a little lie. Someone once said that pretty girls are the best at lying, so Harley had automatically learned this skill. Coupled with the linguistic abilities granted by the Instigator Sequence 8, Harley was very adept at disguising herself, guiding people in the wrong direction through language and behavior. Therefore, from the moment she met Dumbledore, Harley brought out the etiquette she had learned in the upper echelons of countries like the Loan Kingdom and the Faceac Empire. Furthermore, Harley applied these manners with great proficiency, every movement as if elegance was ingrained in her very bones. After all, even the most powerful demigods, or even angels, probably wouldn't spontaneously guess the truth of the matter. Who would idly guess that a child had transmigrated, lived for many years in another world, and then returned to find that the time in this world had not changed? In that case, Harley's displayed polished manners and flawless demeanor would be highly misleading. Especially the white-haired elder in front of her, who looked like a sage. Such a sage would probably be more easily misled in the wrong direction precisely because he thought more deeply. Sure enough, Dumbledore's heart also churned with doubt. From Harley greeting him, to her every movement as she sat down, and then to her covering her mouth and chuckling softly. The girl's actions were incredibly natural, as if she truly were just a girl. Her movements combined both etiquette and the unique vitality of a young girl, seemingly rehearsed countless times. Coupled with the girl's natural reaction and innocent gaze after hearing his words, it was very difficult for Dumbledore to harbor even a shred of suspicion. Dumbledore pondered, and based on the fact that Harley's name on the Book of Admittance had changed this morning, he changed his angle of questioning. Are you very happy now that you know you can go to Hogwarts to learn magic? Do you have a feeling that you are different from usual? Harley nodded and said in a cheerful tone, yes. I woke up very early today, much earlier than usual. When I woke up, I heard the mailbox make a sound, and then I received this letter. At the same time, I also felt much lighter all over, as if some burden had been lifted from my soul. Oh, Dumbledore asked with an interested tone, then may I be so bold as to ask you, Harley? What exactly happened with you feeling much lighter all over, as if some burden had been lifted from your soul? Harley keenly caught the barely concealed solemnity in Dumbledore's eyes, and immediately judged that this should be useful information, which she could use to further mislead while also probing for more information. So, Harley pondered for a moment and replied, Principal Dumbledore, this goes back to last night. Last night, I had a very terrifying nightmare. As she spoke, Harley frowned, revealing an expression intertwined with pain and fear. I dreamt. Harley's expression grew increasingly frightened, as if her entire being subconsciously resisted recalling everything from the dream. Dumbledore continued to smile, but he quietly cast a calming charm. Harley felt a power identical to that of the spectator pathway soothing her mind, so she cooperated by changing her expression. Principal Dumbledore, you might not believe me, but last night I dreamt of a noseless person, constantly wailing in my brain. Harley feigned an effort to recall, but in the end, the wailing disappeared, and the noseless person also vanished into thin air. At the same time, he left a heap of incomprehensible, chaotic, and disorderly text in my brain, making my head ache terribly. Only one word was barely formed, and that word was Avada Kedavra. As she said this, Harley's body trembled slightly. Then this morning I felt much lighter, as if something was missing from my soul. Chapter 5, Misled Dumbledore. Everything Harley said was, of course, true. After discovering an extra soul fragment within herself, Harley naturally had to find a way to investigate the situation. However, at that time, the soul fragment was already filled with an out-of-control and insane will, so Harley could only detect a human face without a nose and one word, Avada Kedavra. So, since Dumbledore was so interested in what was missing from her soul, she might as well tell him. However, Harley still had to add a little more content to cover up the information about the witch sequence. At the same time, I feel that I have gained some memories in my mind this morning, memories of living as a boy, it seems. At the same time, I have also gained some strange abilities. As she spoke, Harley raised a finger, and black flames emerged from it. Look, Headmaster Dumbledore. Harley's tone was filled with undisguised joy. As soon as I woke up, I discovered that I could generate and control this black flame out of thin air. After hearing Harley's words, the smile on Dumbledore's face had vanished, replaced by a grave expression. Harley's few short sentences gave him over 10 guesses, some of which even related to the secret of Lord Voldemort's immortality. Yes, when Harley mentioned that unique human face without a nose, Dumbledore basically confirmed who Harley was talking about. And when Harley released the black, magical flame, Dumbledore almost drew his wand. After all, according to Dumbledore's knowledge, the only black magical flame in the entire wizarding world seemed to be the Fiendfire curse. But soon, Dumbledore calmed down and recognized that it was just a special magical flame, lacking the unique evil aura of the Fiendfire curse. Of course, this flame also seemed quite evil, belonging to the category of dark arts, and was more powerful than ordinary flames. A very interesting phenomenon. Dumbledore nodded, deciding to focus on the young girl Harley first and study these issues after returning. Regarding your dream, I cannot say for sure at the moment. After I return, I will find a dream interpretation master to interpret your dream from a magical perspective. As for the black flame you can suddenly release, I can only say it is very special, truly very special. However, some wizards are gifted and can naturally use certain magic, so your situation can only be considered rare, but not unheard of. As he spoke, Dumbledore stood up and looked at the clock on the wall. It is getting late. Now let me take you to purchase your school supplies, Harley, and take the opportunity to show you the wizarding world. But Headmaster Dumbledore, I have no money. Harley said softly, her fair cheeks blushing slightly. You know, my parents unfortunately passed away and did not leave me anything. Presumably, my Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia would not be willing to pay to support me in learning magic. I will absolutely not shell out even a penny to hire a bunch of tricksters to teach a freak. Absolutely not. Although Uncle Vernon had been stopped by his wife and had been huddled in the dining room silently eavesdropping, he couldn't help himself when he heard that he might have to spend money. However, his voice disappeared immediately after, because his wife covered his mouth, fearing that her irrational husband would provoke the witch and the old wizard outside and then be turned into a toad from a fairy tale by the old wizard. However, Headmaster Dumbledore was not angry, just slightly raised his voice. Harley, your parents did leave you some inheritance. It is just that this inheritance can only be used in the wizarding world and is deposited in a certain location in the wizarding world. I will tell you everything in detail on the way. As he spoke, Dumbledore extended his hand toward Harley. "Miss Potter, may I have the honor of inviting you to visit the Wizarding World with me?" Harley pursed her lips and smiled, drew her right foot back half a step, and then stood up steadily. Subsequently, she extended her hand, wearing white silk gloves, and took Dumbledore's hand. "Of course, Mr. Dumbledore. Then please be sure to hold on tight, because I am about to use magic to travel to our destination." Dumbledore said with a smile, "The magical journey is about to begin." As he spoke, Dumbledore spun in place while holding Harley, and then the two disappeared from the living room with a loud crack. After a long while, the still shaken the Dursley family confirmed that Harley and Dumbledore had left. Subsequently, Uncle Vernon looked at the door where Dudley had disappeared, and his anger flared up again. However, Aunt Petunia was still rational. While soothing her husband's anger, she asked Dudley to sit in the living room and watch TV. At the same time, Aunt Petunia also planned to clean out the guest room in the house and make space for Harley to live in. Soon, they would also have to purchase daily necessities for Harley. Harley felt the surroundings become pitch black, receiving intense pressure from all directions, unable to breathe at all. The young girl's chest felt as if it had been squeezed into an iron hoop and tightly constricted. Her eyeballs also felt as if they were being pushed back into her head, and her eardrums seemed to be pressed deep into her skull. Immediately after, that feeling suddenly disappeared. Harley gasped for air and opened her eyes. Before her was no longer the Dursleys' house living room, but an empty room. On the wall nearby hung a sign, which read, "Apparition Room." It was extremely noisy outside the room, and through the various sounds, Harley barely judged that this should be a pub. Dumbledore had already let go of Harley's hand and looked at Harley with concern. "How do you feel? Are you all right?" Harley shook her head. "It was just uncomfortable for that one moment, everything else is fine." "Is this the way of travel in the Wizarding World?" Dumbledore nodded. "This is indeed a way of travel in the Wizarding World, called apparition. However, only those who have obtained a specific qualification certificate are eligible to use this mode of travel. Using this magic without passing the corresponding examination will result in a certain punishment by the Ministry of Magic, which is the official organization of the Wizarding World." Harley nodded, noting down the information about the Ministry of Magic and the long-distance movement magic in Dumbledore's words. This spell was very ingenious, very much like an ability of the apprentice pathway. Harley decided that she must learn this ability. After all, back when she was a noble Sequence 3, Demoness of Unaging, she had paid a great price and used several sealed artifacts just to kill a Sequence 4 mysticologist. From this, one could see the tenacity and strong life-saving capabilities of the apprentice pathway. Therefore, Harley must learn this ability. "Oh, right." Dumbledore tapped his head lightly, as if he had suddenly remembered something. Subsequently, he drew his wand and waved it lightly in the air, and a wizard hat with a veil appeared in his hand. "Harley, because of some special reasons, I am afraid you need to cover your beautiful face for the time being." Dumbledore said gently, "Of course, if you do not wish to cover it, there is no problem. All the power of choice lies in your hands." Harley did not hesitate, directly taking the wizard hat and placing it on her head. Of course, before putting it on, Harley did not forget to quietly sense it to ensure there was no curse on it. "Of course I am willing, and I have already proven it with my actions." After putting on the wizard hat, Harley looked up at Dumbledore. "I believe that things done by such a wise wizard as you must certainly have specific arrangements." Dumbledore chuckled, left the room, and strode toward the pub hall. Harley followed closely behind. Chapter 6, The Potter Family Vault. After leaving the room, the outside was indeed a pub. Although it was not yet 10 in the morning, wizards in robes were already appearing in the pub. Upon seeing Dumbledore, many people stood up excitedly to greet him. The landlord even ran out from behind the bar to invite Dumbledore for a drink. However, Dumbledore shook his head and pointed to Harley beside him. "Sorry, Tom. I have other things to do today, and I need to take this young lady to buy her school supplies." Old Tom, who had run the pub for so many years, was a shrewd character. As headmaster, Dumbledore held a noble position and hadn't personally taken a student to purchase items in a long time. But today he had specially brought a young girl, whose face was veiled, so her identity must be extraordinary. Perhaps she was Dumbledore's illegitimate daughter. After all, there had never been any news about Dumbledore dating in the Wizarding World. So old Tom nodded, didn't ask further, just said goodbye, and returned behind the bar. However, his gaze remained quietly on Dumbledore and Harley, clearly still carrying a hint of curiosity. Harley naturally noticed old Tom's gaze, but since Dumbledore didn't react, she couldn't say anything. Dumbledore took Harley to a small courtyard surrounded by walls on all sides and introduced it to her. The pub we just stayed in is called the Leaky Cauldron, located near London's Charing Cross Road. On both sides of the pub are a bookstore and a record shop. The pub is enchanted, so muggles, those who cannot use magic, cannot see the Leaky Cauldron. Dumbledore paused slightly, then pointed to a spot in the small courtyard. The street where wizards are here is called Diagon Alley. See that trash can? Count 3 bricks up, then 2 across, and tap 3 times with your wand to enter Diagon Alley. As he spoke, Dumbledore gently tapped the brick with his wand. The brick shook and quickly retreated to both sides. A wide archway appeared, with a cobblestone path ahead. Harley looked at this scene with interest, wondering which pathway could achieve this. After thinking about it, the apprentice pathway seemed most likely. If it were the spectator pathway, perhaps at a high sequence, one could apply specific mental influence to the surroundings to barely achieve this visual effect. Let's go. Dumbledore said softly, we have a lot to do today. Headmaster Dumbledore, where are we going first? Harley asked in a voice that revealed excitement and a slight fear, perfectly mimicking the emotions of a child encountering strange things that only existed in fantasy. Oh, we are going to Gringotts first. Dumbledore pointed to a snow-white building that stood high above the surrounding shops. In terms you can understand, it is equivalent to a Muggle bank. Your parents' inheritance, including the property of the entire Potter family, is stored in the vaults of Gringotts. Harley nodded and followed Dumbledore's pace. On the way to Gringotts, there were many shops. Many of the items held great attraction for Harley. Especially 3 places: a potion shop, a bookstore, and an owl shop. The owls in the owl shop were full of energy, and Harley couldn't help but take a few extra looks at them. Standing on the very outside was a snow owl of appropriate size. Harley felt that such a pure white creature would be very suitable for crafting into a puppet. It would only take a little dark arts combined with a curse, which any ordinary witch could do if she studied carefully and practiced repeatedly. However, Harley dismissed this thought. After all, dark arts, which sounded very evil, probably wasn't liked in any world. Just like, apart from Emperor Rosal, not many people liked witches, synonymous with evil and disaster. So Harley decided to avoid doing things that would make many people feel fear and disgust as much as possible. Especially since she didn't yet understand the depths of this world. If she were hunted down for being too evil, it wouldn't be worth the loss. Dumbledore took Harley to a bronze door, where a small creature stood. According to Dumbledore, that was a goblin. After Dumbledore produced a key, the goblin bowed and added, Professor Dumbledore, does that item in Vault 713 need to be taken? No need. Dumbledore shook his head, someone will come to pick it up in a few days. The goblin's face clearly showed a disappointed expression, as if holding a hot potato that he couldn't get rid of. A goblin took the 2 of them on a goblin transport vehicle to the Potter family's underground vault. When Harley got off the cart, she secretly vowed in her heart to take as much money as possible, striving not to have to come back for a long time. The Potter family's vault was piled with gold coins, silver bars, and copper coins, as well as boxes of gemstones. Inside the deepest part of the vault, there were several large cabinets engraved with various patterns, emitting fluctuations of magic. Everything in here is yours. Dumbledore said softly, all of it is the property of the Potter family. Originally, your family had a shampoo industry chain, but it was sold off a long time ago, and the money obtained is all here. Harley lifted her veil, leaned over slightly, and picked up a gold coin from the top of the pile. This is a galleon. Dumbledore introduced from the side, and then added the names of the other 2 types of coins and the exchange rules between the 3. The gold coins carried special magic, presumably to prevent anyone from counterfeiting. Seeing the gold coins, Harley's eyes went a bit straight. After all, she had really been impoverished for too long. Wild Beyonders were simply too expensive, from buying potion formulas to gathering those materials scattered across the world, not to mention obtaining life-saving magical items. These money-guzzling monsters left Harley penniless, forcing her to frequently moonlight as a Beyonder of the Error Pathway or do some old-school Sequence 9 jobs. Harley put down the gold coin and pointed to the large cabinets in the deepest part. Headmaster Dumbledore, may I ask what is in those cabinets at the back of the vault? Dumbledore shook his head. I don't know exactly what it is, as those cabinets can only be opened by the bloodline of the Potter family. However, I heard your father James mention that they should contain some of your family's collection of books, as well as some more dangerous magical items. Harley nodded and chose not to touch those books and magical items for the time being, even though she was incredibly curious. Dumbledore conjured a leather pouch and a large wooden spoon and handed them to Harley, as Harley was wearing a dress and it was inconvenient to bend over or squat. Harley filled a large bag with money, which made Dumbledore raise his eyebrows repeatedly. Harley, you must spend this money frugally. If you spend it all before you graduate and find a job, it will be very difficult. But Harley immediately put on a pitiful look. Professor, you know, I never had pocket money at the Dursleys' house, so I never had the chance to buy the books I wanted to read. Therefore, I want to take a little more money to buy more books to read. At this moment, tears seemed ready to spill from the corners of Harley's eyes. Dumbledore's heart softened, and he nodded. Since it's for reading, that is naturally fine. After all, reading is a very good behavior. Subsequently, Dumbledore stopped interfering with Harley's taking of money and walked out of the vault. Naturally, he didn't notice that Harley had picked out a few high-quality rubies and tucked them into a small pocket inside her dress. Chapter 7. If a wild Beander has money. What would happen if a wild Beander had money? No one had ever considered this question. After all, it was difficult for wild Beanders to safely earn big money without breaking the law. At most, they could only make their lives a little less miserable. But Harley truly experienced the joy of being rich today, especially after confirming that this wizarding currency had decent purchasing power. Harley first went to buy Hogwarts school uniforms. After all, according to Dumbledore, it would take some time for Madame Malkin to make the uniforms after taking Harley's measurements. In addition to the school uniforms required by Hogwarts, Harley ordered several sets of sturdier clothing, convenient for wearing while conducting occult research. Especially after hearing Madame Malkin mention dragonhide clothing, Harley really wanted to buy a set and test if it could be crafted into a magical item. After all, in Harley's original world, at least in the northern continent, creatures like dragons only existed in legends. Most Beanders had never seen one. She had heard that the mythical form of a Beander from the spectator pathway was some kind of dragon, but Harley had not received any particularly detailed information. However, after inquiring about the price of the clothing, Harley temporarily dismissed this idea. If Dumbledore had chosen to wait outside the shop while she bought clothes, and thus hadn't witnessed Harley's spending power. Then, during the subsequent itinerary, Dumbledore witnessed it firsthand. When purchasing ordinary teaching supplies, besides a cauldron and brass scales, Harley also bought some items that looked full of magic. Harley's explanation to Dumbledore was that she was curious about the magic contained in these things, such as the moving star charts. But in reality, Harley wanted to study what kind of structure the magical items of this world had, and by the way, use spirit vision to peek at the magical items. After all, with a demigod-level old man following her, Harley still dared not use spirit vision casually. In Flourish and Blots, besides the necessary textbooks, Harley also bought a large batch of miscellaneous books, ranging from the humanities, history, and politics of the wizarding world to the production methods of rare potion and the properties of special materials. This made Dumbledore very gratified. At least Harley hadn't lied to him. With so much money in hand, she still chose to use the vast majority of it to buy books. However, Harley was a bit disappointed. She couldn't find any magical items with combat capability, or books about crafting such magical items. But Harley didn't believe the wizarding world lacked such items. She could only conclude that the official organization, the Ministry of Magic, had restricted these items with dangerous properties in order to maintain its own stability. This made Harley very unhappy. Even the ordinary society in Britain didn't ban guns. However, thinking about the attitude of those churches in the northern continent towards magical items, Harley expressed understanding. However, she speculated that there must be some shady places selling these interesting trinkets. Even if Britain didn't have them, the world was so big, there must be places that did. But that was not something to consider in the short term. When Harley bought a beautiful snowy owl from Elop's Owl Emporium, Dumbledore looked at Harley's list. Now there is only one most important item left, and that is your wand. As he spoke, Dumbledore walked in another direction. A wand is the most important item for a wizard. Without a wand, it is difficult to cast magic. Of course, there are many powerful wizards who can cast magic wandlessly. But for a little wizard, having a wand is still better, at least it can assist them very effectively. The two walked into the last shop. This shop was small and dilapidated, the gold lettering on the sign had peeled off, and there was only one wand in the display window. The whole shop gave people the feeling of being on the verge of bankruptcy from its appearance, and one wouldn't expect much from the things inside. But Harley had a grave expression, because there was a large amount of extraordinary spiritual aura in this shop. However, considering Dumbledore had said that most wizards in this world needed to use a wand to cast magic, this shop was equivalent to an arms dealer, specializing in selling those magical items used for combat. So it was understandable that it gave Harley this feeling. As soon as they entered the shop, an old man stood in front of them. The old man was currently wiping a wand, with an empty box beside him. "Good afternoon, dear Albus, and this young lady. The old man greeted. "Good afternoon, Garrick. Beside me is Miss Harley Potter." Dumbledore also greeted and introduced Harley, then introduced the old man in front of him to Harley. "Harley, the person in front of you is Mr. Ollivander, the best wand manufacturer in Britain." "Hello, Mr. Ollivander." Harley curtsied slightly. "Hello." Obviously, Ollivander was a bit surprised, looked at Dumbledore, and asked with his eyes. However, Dumbledore did not speak, and mouthed, "Look at the newspaper in a few days." Ollivander nodded in understanding, stopped asking, and began to introduce wands, starting with the wands used by Harley's parents. However, it was clear that Harley was quite picky. After trying dozens of wands, these wands were not very willing to accept her. Even if some wands accepted her, it seemed to be only because they admired her power. "What a picky little wizard," Ollivander said thoughtfully. "Come and try this one." Holly, phoenix feather, 11 inches. The phoenix feather in this wand and the phoenix feather in another wand come from the same phoenix. And the other wand was sold to that famous Dark Lord, and once left a lightning-shaped scar on you. But now, that scar seems to have disappeared. As he spoke, Ollivander examined Harley's forehead, but the iconic lightning scar was no longer there. After that soul fragment fell into chaos and was removed by Harley, the scar that could not be healed by any medicine became removable. Unfortunately, this wand was also not very suitable, and the reaction was exactly the same as the other wands. It could be used, but it was listless. Dumbledore noticed this scene and revealed a thoughtful expression. "All right, Miss Potter, I thought this wand would suit you, but it doesn't match." Ollivander sighed, "Then let us try again." "Mr. Ollivander," Harley suddenly interrupted him, "I think my wand core might be related to snakes." This was not a baseless guess, but because Harley remembered her mythical creature form, a snake-haired woman resembling Medusa. Therefore, Harley intuitively believed that a wand with a snake core would be more compatible with her. Ollivander revealed a surprised expression, using materials from snake creatures as a core. "I rarely do that, though wand manufacturers in America like it more. But it is indeed worth a try. After all, this is your intuition, isn't it? I remember I still have a few wands made with the nerves of snake creatures as cores." As he spoke, Ollivander began to rummage through the pile of wands, and finally found a dusty box. He gently wiped the dust off the box and opened it. Inside was a slender wand. Ollivander gently stroked the wand and introduced, "This was made by my grandfather." At that time, he wanted to replicate the wands of the four founders, so he always imitated the materials of the four founders' wands to create. However, after he finished making a batch of wands, he went out to have a drink to relax, and suddenly went crazy. "Crazy?" Harley asked suspiciously, and a look of interest appeared on Dumbledore's face. After all, he had never heard Ollivander talk about his grandfather's history. "Yes, crazy," Ollivander said softly, "but Street Mungo's hospital diagnosed that he had been working at high intensity and then drank a lot of alcohol, so his brain went wrong. And this wand in my hand is one of the last batch of wands he made, and also the last wand in that batch that used snake nerves as a core. But I don't know exactly what kind of snake's nerves it is, because only this box is not labeled with the source and type of the wand core." As he spoke, Ollivander handed the wand to Harley. "Try it." Snakewood wand, the core is the nerve of some kind of snake, 12 inches long. The last batch of wands my grandfather made were all very powerful, and I presume this one is no exception. Chapter 8, The Wand Compatible with the Witch Pathway. Harley took the wand, and light immediately erupted from it. Ollivander shouted loudly, "Oh, how wonderful. You truly are suited for this wand, suited for the snake core wand you chose by intuition. It is truly marvelous. I must note this down to conduct some research later." As he spoke, Ollivander waved his own wand. A heavy notebook and a quill flew out from the deepest part of the room. Ollivander flipped the notebook to a later section and then quickly recorded something. After quite a while, Ollivander remembered he still had a guest, so he looked up again. "Thank you very much, Miss Potter. You have provided me with a completely new line of thought, allowing a wizard to choose a wand core suitable for themselves based on their intuition. I have always believed that the wand chooses the wizard, but why can it not be the other way around, with the wizard choosing the wand?" Harley eventually spent 7 galleons to buy the wand, and also received a wand care kit gifted by Ollivander. On the way out, Harley kept examining her wand, a strange light flashing in her eyes. Dumbledore, who had been quiet in the shop, finally spoke. "Harley, you must protect your wand well. Wands and owls can be said to be a wizard's best companions, so you must cherish them. You must be especially careful not to walk while admiring your new wand, lest you bump into a tree and snap the wand." Harley nodded embarrassedly and carefully put the wand away. It was already noon. After Madame Malkin promised to send the unfinished clothes directly to Harley's home, Harley left her address and declined Dumbledore's proposal for them to have a meal together. Dumbledore did not insist, instead taking Harley back to the Dursleys' house, handing her the train ticket to Hogwarts, and then leaving. Seeing that Dumbledore had left the living room of the Dursleys' house, and that the Dursley family had also gone out and did not seem to intend to return until evening, Harley let out a long sigh, tossed the luggage she had bought onto the empty floor of the living room, and collapsed onto the sofa. It was truly fortunate, the last loophole in Harley's plan had been cleared. Harley had originally planned to pretend to know nothing, using her skilled acting to cover up the secret of the witch pathway. Simply put, it was to refuse to admit it even if beaten to death. But there was a problem with this, as Harley was not sure if there were people monitoring her surroundings, nor was she sure if the Dursley family would blabber. However, the plan was more perfect than she had imagined. Dumbledore was very interested in the nightmare Harley described, and he seemed to know something about that soul fragment. Therefore, by using the shattering of that soul fragment to gain an extra memory as a cover, Harley successfully misled Dumbledore. As long as she sealed the memories of the Dursley family from the morning, it would be fine. This only required a little curse to accomplish. After reviewing her plan, Harley pulled out the wand she was carrying and began to study it carefully. When Harley held this wand, she suddenly felt as if it were connected to her own flesh and blood. It was not just a compatibility in terms of being a wizard in this world. If this wand were viewed as a magical item, it was also very compatible with her witch pathway. Therefore, Harley had various speculations about the wand's core, even guessing that the wand's core might come from the nerves of a giant snake with demigod-level strength. After all, the mythical creature form of the witch sequence was a snake-haired woman, similar to the legendary Medusa. Of course, this was just Harley's delusion. After all, magical items made from materials from a demigod were rare and hard to come by. Regardless, this wand was at least very compatible with her and would suffice for now. Sitting up from the sofa, Harley began to read her textbooks in the living room. The white snowy owl had already been named Hedwig by her, and it was currently perched quietly on Harley's shoulder. Owls were truly spiritual, when Harley hadn't yet named Hedwig and wanted to reach out to hold it. Hedwig had put on airs, acted shy, and pecked at Harley, which angered Harley to the point where she even had a fleeting thought of refining it into a puppet. As it turned out, the moment Harley had that thought, the snowy owl, which had been flapping about, seemed to sense the danger, instantly quieted down, and obediently let Harley pet it for a long time. Later, when Harley casually opened History of Magic, and chose the first name she saw as the owl's name, it did not resist at all. This gave Harley a very good impression of such spiritual birds that knew when to advance and when to retreat. At least they were not like some nobles who remained very arrogant even when facing powerful beyonders. Some idiots even hoarded food during the War of the Gods and were unwilling to sell it to commoners at a fair price. Such idiots deserved to die. After Dumbledore returned to Hogwarts, he was not as relaxed and carefree as Harley. Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape were in the headmaster's office. Professor McGonagall looked grim, but Professor Snape was a bit excited, pacing back and forth in the office. Seeing Dumbledore emerge from the fireplace, Professor Snape hurried to meet him, but still feigned an air of indifference. "Principal, is that child all right? I mean, is it?" But Dumbledore interrupted him. "Severus, you go out first. I need to discuss some things with Professor McGonagall privately." "Principal, why can't I stay and listen? You know, I..." Before Professor Snape could finish his sentence, he was stopped by Dumbledore. "Apologies, Severus. You know, some things are not suitable for too many people to know." It was evident that Dumbledore was not in a good mood, so his words cut straight to the point. Professor Snape was clearly unwilling. However, after the two stared at each other for a while, Professor Snape chose to leave the headmaster's office. After Professor Snape left, Dumbledore looked at Professor McGonagall. "Minerva, I have seen that child. How is the situation? Has Harry really become Harley?" Professor McGonagall asked anxiously. Dumbledore nodded, then began to recount from the moment he met Harley, all the way to when he sent her home. Subsequently, Dumbledore added much of his own analysis and told Professor McGonagall that he had used various types of magic to confirm it, and it was indeed Harley. "But that shouldn't be," Professor McGonagall said with an uneasy look. "Even if she were a metamorphagus, she should at least be able to change back. And her name shouldn't change either. But now, even the name in the Book of Admittance has changed. In fact, regarding this point, I have some speculations." Dumbledore tapped the table lightly. "Harley told me one thing." Subsequently, Dumbledore recounted the information about Harley seeing the image of Lord Voldemort in her nightmare, as well as the feeling of something shattering. The two analyzed this and discussed it for a long time, but eventually had to give up. After all, the information they possessed was simply too little, so they could not determine exactly which situation it was. However, the two at least reached a consensus. After all, for so many years, no wizard had seen Harley, second setting, seen a few times in the original work, and the only one who had contact with her was the squib Mrs. Fig, and this squib had no records in the wizarding world. Therefore, as long as Dumbledore announced that it was to prevent other dark wizards from hunting Harley that he had deliberately announced the wrong gender, everything could be explained away. After Professor McGonagall left, Dumbledore specifically called for Professor Snape again and warned him multiple times, requiring Professor Snape to maintain restraint. 2 days after Dumbledore took Harley to Diagon Alley, a piece of news in The Daily Prophet swept across the entire wizarding world. The boy who lived, Harry Potter, is actually a girl. Chapter 9, The Witch's Spirit Vision. For the remaining month or so, Harley felt very pleased. When Harley first arrived home that day, the Dursley family was not home. It turned out they had gone to buy daily necessities for Harley. That very evening, Harley moved into the guest room of the Dursleys' house, and the room had been thoroughly cleaned by Aunt Petunia, with all the items inside replaced. Uncle Vernon gritted his teeth as he handed a sum of money to Harley, allowing her to buy new clothes and other things she wanted. The condition was that for the remainder of the time before school started, she must stay in her room and not keep summoning eerie black flames. Harley did not resist this. Anyway, even if she really did summon black flames, Uncle Vernon could do nothing about it. Besides, she did not have that much time to tangle with the Dursley family. In fact, Harley spent most of her time reading. During her escape, Harley had often read books, especially those that ordinary people could see, which introduced various kingdoms. After all, she had been in a state of wandering almost the entire time. Therefore, it was very necessary to understand the politics, culture, customs, and other knowledge of various kingdoms. And now, Harley had proficiently started to study this information about the wizarding world, beginning with a careful reading of History of Magic. These books seemed dull, but the knowledge they contained was extremely important. Especially a book written by the current Minister for Magic, Cornelius Fudge, From Prefect to Minister. This book was very useful to Harley. Although the book was full of the author's bragging, the person who wrote it was, after all, the current Minister for Magic, so most of the information still had reference value. This allowed Harley to learn quite a bit of useful information, especially regarding the structure and political system of the Ministry of Magic. Besides these miscellaneous books, the textbooks prescribed by Hogwarts also benefited Harley greatly. Through these books, Harley gained a rough understanding of the magic system. This was a system that was very different from the sequence pathway. The sequence pathway could only be accessed by consuming specific potions to gain corresponding abilities or the qualification to learn occult knowledge more safely. However, everyone could consume sequence potions and have a chance to become an extraordinary person. And even if one was not an extraordinary person, one could still come into contact with and use some occult knowledge. But whether it was safe or not was another matter. It could be said that in that world, almost everyone had the aptitude, but the total amount of extraordinary power was limited. In this world, however, the amount of extraordinary power was infinite, but only those with aptitude were qualified to use the extraordinary power of this world, which was magic. People without aptitude, even if they came into contact with magic, could not use it. Furthermore, from the existing knowledge, magic seemed to be safer than the sequence pathway. At least if one did not court death, one should not die. Stepping onto the sequence pathway was always accompanied by the risk of losing control and going mad. Some pathways required one to be extremely cautious from the low sequences. One wrong step could lead to falling into an abyss. And according to the information Harley obtained from killing that secret wizard with a long heritage, the higher the sequence, the easier it was to go mad. Therefore, once on an extraordinary path, one had to fight against madness for a lifetime. But magic seemed not to have these problems. There were even systematic schools, textbooks that every wizard could read, and there was never any mention of madness or losing control. Although she did not know if a wizard with sufficiently high strength would encounter such a situation, at least ordinary wizards should not. And what concerned Harley the most was potions. As a wild extraordinary person, basically every bottle of sequence potion was prepared by Harley herself. Especially at the demigod level like the Demoness of Despair and the Demoness of Unaging, even the Demoness sect could not store ready-made potions. Learning to use existing materials to prepare suitable concoctions had always been a required course for extraordinary people. Of course, excluding that group of barbaric physical class professionals. Moreover, Harley still needed to find a potion suitable for her current situation to restore her strength. Therefore, the importance of potions had risen to another level. The Dursley family had not had a good time during this period because there was a witch living upstairs. Although Harley did not come out of her room often, only occasionally running to a nearby Chinese herbal medicine shop to purchase some medicinal herbs, or letting her owl go for a fly. But the strange sounds coming from Harley's room were indeed worrying, especially for a rigid family like the Dursleys, who did not want others to gossip. So, when Harley finally proposed that she would leave tomorrow and asked Uncle Vernon to take her to King's Cross Station, Uncle Vernon felt overjoyed. He originally wanted to be stubborn and mock why wizards needed to use trains for normal people like him. However, seeing the black flame suddenly ignite on Harley's hair, Uncle Vernon swallowed the words he wanted to say back into his stomach. Harley nodded with satisfaction, expressing her appreciation for Uncle Vernon's sense of current affairs. The next day, Harley got up early. Her things were stuffed into several large trunks. From various magic books to the beautiful dresses and skincare products Harley had bought, the trunks contained everything. In terms of skincare products, Harley believed that what wizards made was definitely not as good as what ordinary people made, because Harley had not seen any potions related to beauty in the magazines of the wizarding world at all. Uncle Vernon drove the car as if it were flying the whole way, trying to get rid of the witch in the car as quickly as possible. After arriving at King's Cross Station, Uncle Vernon helped Harley move her luggage off the car, then said a simple goodbye and left quickly. Looking at Uncle Vernon's appearance, the words he wanted to say were probably not, "Goodbye," but, "Never see you again." Harley did not care at all, put all her luggage on a trolley, and then walked towards Platform 9 and Platform 10. Since the platform written on the ticket given by Dumbledore was Platform 9 3/4, it must be a platform exclusive to wizards, similar to Diagon Alley. Dumbledore did not tell Harley how to get to Platform 9 3/4, but Harley had her own way to find it. Harley gently pinched her left earlobe and opened her spirit vision. The witch's spirit vision was not as powerful as the seer and reader pathways, which could be used for divination or seeing through the forms of mythical creatures. When the witch's spirit vision looked at people, it could at most be used to simply judge other people's emotions or see invisible spirit world creatures. Its strongest effect was being able to observe the world in the mirror, or even peer through the mirror at things outside another mirror surface. It was a very good ability for stealing intelligence. However, for inanimate objects, the witch's spirit vision could still barely see residual spirituality. For example, Harley had once used spirit vision to peer at an agate peacock's egg and saw a radiance as bright as the stars. According to the witch who prepared the potion for Harley at that time, this radiance came from the residual spirituality of the extraordinary species materials, so this was also one of the keys to the successful preparation of the potion. And now, Harley was preparing to find the entrance to the station through spirituality, or rather, the strength of magic. Chapter 10, Spirituality and Magic. While heading to Diagon Alley, because a demigod-level entity was accompanying her, Harley did not use spirit vision to peep at anything. However, after Dumbledore left, that very night, Harley used spirit vision to observe all the items she had bought, excluding, of course, that wand. Through observation, Harley was surprised to discover that her spirit vision also seemed capable of judging the strength of the magic power contained within magical items. For a few items with higher prices, which were said to be extremely difficult to create, the luster emitted after activating spirit vision was quite strong, belonging to objects with more residual magic. Moreover, this magic radiance was very similar to the spirituality radiance in Harley's memory. One could even say it was exactly the same. As for the other few cheap items, the luster they emitted was much dimmer. As for the items in the Dursleys' house, they had almost no luster at all. And now, after activating spirit vision, Harley had only intended to find the entrance, but instead, she clearly saw that several people in the crowd carried the radiance of spirituality. At this moment, those few people were pushing luggage trolleys towards the partition wall between platforms 9 and 10. And that partition wall was emitting a very dazzling radiance. After watching them pass through the partition wall, Harley also pushed her trolley, took a deep breath, and walked directly through that wall. While passing through the wall, Harley felt an inexplicable force enveloping her, seemingly verifying her identity. The other side of the wall was also a platform, with a sign hanging on it that read, Platform 9 3/4. A deep red steam locomotive was docked by the platform. That locomotive even made Harley think she had returned to the Lowen Kingdom, as the other trains at King's Cross Station were certainly not this ancient. And those few people who had passed through the wall before Harley were currently having their tickets checked and boarding the train. Harley pinched her earlobe again, deactivated spirit vision, and then pushed her trolley over. After boarding the train, Harley went all the way to the rear of the carriage and found an empty compartment. It wasn't that Harley disliked socializing, but she had some information she couldn't quite figure out for the moment, so she needed a space to be alone. Today was the first time Harley had used spirit vision to observe other wizards. Harley had once used spirit vision to observe herself, but she had not seen any radiance of magic or spirituality on her body. Harley could only see the aura of her entire body, all of which matched the corresponding colors, and was very healthy. As for the gorgeous radiance existing on those magical items, Harley could not see it on herself at all. But just now, Harley discovered that other wizards had the same spirituality radiance on them as on the magical items, some azure like the sky, others crimson as if burning with fire. This was very interesting. No matter how proficient a pathway is at spirit vision, it cannot purely identify beyonders through spirit vision alone. If they really could be found, the dogs raised by the churches would have long since caught all the wild beyonders. But Harley could see the gorgeous radiance within the bodies of other wizards, the same as the residual spirituality radiance in the materials of those extraordinary species. This instantly reminded Harley of something. She had once been called a genius in the demoness sect. Other people would exhaust their spirituality very quickly the first time they activated spirit vision. And during combat, they often faced the problem of insufficient spirituality. After all, the abilities of the witch pathway are numerous, with extremely strong life-saving capabilities, so the spirituality consumed is naturally very high. Therefore, insufficient spirituality has always been a normal phenomenon. But Harley did not have this problem, or rather, she had so much spirituality that it could be called inexhaustible. Take the most basic ability of a Sequence 7 witch, releasing black flame, for example. Harley could maintain the release of black flame day and night without stopping, and the longest duration she could maintain it was more than 10 times that of others. Other witches would be panting with exhaustion after a fight, their spirituality completely depleted. But Harley could bombard with black flame and frost in turns, and finally consume spirituality to turn invisible and escape, or simply use mirror substitution. Harley thoughtfully rubbed the long hair by her ear, pondering this matter. Could it be that magic is spirituality? Are the two the same? But why can't my spirit vision identify beyonders, yet it can identify the wizards of this world? Harley muttered to herself, but with too little information, she had no way to make an accurate judgment. However, Harley still chose to record this information in a small notebook she carried with her. She still used the language of the Loan Kingdom, ensuring that others could not understand it, nor could they probe into her most core secrets. Subsequently, Harley took out a book to read. Although she could acquire many abilities after drinking the witch potion, most rituals and magic still needed to be learned by herself. She just had more advantages when learning certain parts of them. Therefore, Harley had always had the habit of absorbing occult knowledge in all aspects, never refusing knowledge from any field. This included divination, which had a touchingly low success rate when used by witches. Harley had learned a few tricks of it too. Although back at Sequence 7, Harley's divination success rate still couldn't compare to a Sequence 9 seer. After all, she was just a lone wolf, without that many helpers, and the witch pathway was not popular among many factions. During the holidays, Harley had already almost finished reading 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi, and had firmly memorized the medicinal properties within. There were many herbs in it whose names were different from the herbs on the northern continent, but their effects were extremely similar. Some even looked quite similar. For example, a material called crystalline sunflower was the main ingredient for the Sequence 9 barred potion of the Sun Pathway, the pathway mastered by the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun. Harley found a herb in 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi, called Scorching Sunflower. The appearance of the two looked relatively similar, and their effects seemed close as well. There were many other materials that also had the same phenomenon. The names were different, but the effects were the same or close. This made Harley feel expectant. Many potions whose preparation methods she had once learned might be able to be recreated here, and her hope of lifting the seal on her body was also greater. The train had already started, and the sliding door of the compartment Harley was in was opened, making the sound of pulleys rolling. Harley subconsciously straightened her spine naturally, and the book in her hand was gently placed on her lap. A smile appeared on her face, but she felt a bit unhappy inside. Why would someone be so impolite, not even knocking on the compartment door before pulling it open? It was exactly as if they were carved from the same mold as those ordinary people on the northern continent. Could it be that only the nobles in the kingdom knew how to be polite? At this moment, a red-haired boy walked into the compartment, dragging luggage in his hand. He had just wanted to say something, when he saw a black-haired young lady in front of him wearing a white dress, who was quietly looking at him, with an open book on her lap. The boy instantly forgot what he had wanted to say, and recalled his previous rude action, so he stood stiffly in place, embarrassed. "May I ask if there is something you need?" Harley saw that the boy in front of her hadn't spoken for a long time, just staring straight at her, and couldn't help but feel a bit displeased. Was she also this stupid looking back then? Just thinking about it felt terrifying. Hello, my name is Ron Weasley," the boy said stammeringly. "I just wanted to ask, may I ask if anyone is sitting here? Other places are all full, so I can't find a place to sit." Harley shook her head. "Mr. Weasley, no one is sitting here. So you can stay here, as long as you don't make too much noise." As she spoke, Harley lowered her head again to read her textbook. Ron's face flushed red. He softly stuffed all his luggage onto the rack in the compartment, and then appeared at a loss, not knowing what he should do. Chapter 11, Magic Food. The compartment was very quiet, and Harley was still flipping through her Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook. After all, since she couldn't directly buy books about the dark arts, Harley could only infer information about the dark arts in this world by reading books on defense against the dark arts. This quiet atmosphere made Ron, who was sitting across from Harley, feel very uncomfortable. After all, the way Harley was quietly reading made him unable to start a conversation. But Ron himself didn't want to follow Harley's example and find a book to read. On one hand, influenced by his older brothers, he had absolutely no interest in reading. And on the other hand, he didn't want his own battered, second-hand books to affect the young girl's impression of him. So Ron could only awkwardly stare at the fields and pastures outside the window, silently praying for the train to arrive at the school quickly. Fortunately, around 12:45, there was a clattering sound in the corridor, and then someone pulled open the compartment door. "Dear, would you like to buy anything from the trolley?" a smiling woman asked. Harley didn't quite understand why many people couldn't even learn to knock on the door before entering a room. Wasn't that the most basic etiquette? However, she still politely looked up, preparing to decline. After all, in her experience, no matter which kingdom's train it was, the food sold on trains was rarely high quality and inexpensive. But when Harley saw the strange-looking food on the cart, she became a bit interested, so she simply asked, "Hello, what kind of food do you have for sale?" "Oh, dear, there's plenty. For example, Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, Drooble's best blowing gum, chocolate frogs." The woman reeled off a long list of names that Harley had never heard before. "Child, are you Muggle-born? Then I suggest you try the Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and the chocolate frogs. These could be said to be the most iconic magic food sold on the train." Magic food. Harley pondered this term, feeling a bit curious. Could supernatural powers also be applied to food? Did eating these foods increase one's supernatural powers, or was it something else? "Ma'am, I'll take a little bit of everything," Harley said, pulling a wallet out of the bag beside her. After paying 11 sickles and 7 nuts, Harley bought a large pile of food. The saleswoman thoughtfully included a bag to make it easier for Harley to carry. After all, a girl as pretty as her holding a pile of snacks didn't look very elegant. Then, the saleswoman looked at Ron, who was sitting across from Harley. However, Ron's face turned bright red, and he shook his head, muttering that he had brought his own food. Harley first picked up a snack called a chocolate frog, gently brushed her hair behind her ear, and calmly pinched her earlobe. After opening the packaging, a frog suddenly jumped out. Fortunately, Harley was quick-witted and grabbed it tightly. Watching the chocolate frog struggling, Harley wore a thoughtful expression and decided to use a mystical ritual. With a light flick of her small hand, a wand slid out from her sleeve. Of course, this wand wasn't purchased from a wand shop, but rather, Harley had used an awl to buy some herbs and wood from an apothecary. After performing a simple ritual, this wood became a special wand that could assist a witch in completing more powerful rituals or be used as a substitute to save her life. Harley pointed the wand at the chocolate frog, while taking a few bottles out of a small pouch and dripping a few drops of liquid onto the wand. Ron watched Harley's fluid, practiced movements from the side, his mouth hanging open in surprise. As the ritual progressed, a look of pleasant surprise appeared in Harley's eyes, and the corners of her mouth curled up involuntarily. These items were called magic food by the saleswoman, which made Harley curious. Did these foods contain supernatural powers? After activating her spirit vision, Harley indeed saw a faint halo contained within the chocolate frog. Although it wasn't much, it definitely possessed magic. After discovering that the chocolate frog was trying to escape, Harley performed a simple ritual. Although she couldn't determine exactly how the chocolate frog was made or why it contained magic, Harley felt that this belonged to the ability of the Mother Pathway or the Moon Pathway, and it was even more advanced than that. She had never heard of any Beyonders from these two sequences selling special food. At most, they cultivated strange herbs and brewed them into special potions. This made Harley even more expectant about magic. Originally, Harley only planned to leave Hogwarts after finding a way to restore her strength and seeking the possibility of advancing to Sequence 2. After all, the demoness of Unaging had an infinite lifespan, so Harley naturally had to find some goals for herself. She had no faith, so naturally, she didn't need to dedicate her life to the primordial witch. But now, Harley began planning to complete these 7 years of schooling, and then sneak into other magic schools to take a look. Such a rich magic system, wasn't it more promising than Sequences? After planning her future, Harley began to enjoy the delicious food. Ron, sitting nearby, watched longingly, swallowing his saliva, while holding a bulging paper box in his hand. It seemed that this Mr. Weasley didn't have much pocket money, perhaps his family wasn't very wealthy, or his upbringing was strict, and he had no pocket money. Harley quickly made a judgment in her mind. However, Ron soon stopped looking at Harley and silently ate his sandwich. This improved Harley's impression of him a little bit, at least the boy in front of her wasn't completely ill-mannered. Although her first impression of this boy wasn't good, his subsequent behavior had, to a certain extent, reversed her impression of him. At the same time, Harley also had to maintain a good image, lest that demigod-level monster continue to peep at her. If that old man had the same nasty personality as the mentor of deceit or the parasite, this kind of thing was highly likely to happen. Therefore, Harley decided to share some of her food and, by the way, see if she could trade it for some information. "Would you like some?" Harley asked after swallowing the last bite of the chocolate frog, picking up a pumpkin pasty. "No, no need," Ron stammered, while waving the sandwich in his hand. "My mom made me corned beef sandwiches, although I don't really like corned beef." "Don't be polite," Harley said with a slight smile, "I can tell you don't really like eating that. It just so happens that I bought a lot of food, and I certainly can't finish it all, so come and share some. You can tell me some common knowledge about the wizarding world in exchange, since I currently live in a muggle home." As she spoke, Harley handed the pasty to Ron. Ron looked at the pumpkin pasty in the slender hand before him, hesitated for a moment, and still chose to take it. Out of gratitude, Ron began sharing little bits of knowledge about life in the wizarding world with Harley, such as the cards in the chocolate frogs and the strange flavors of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. Unfortunately, Ron spoke randomly, so this knowledge wasn't very systematic, and it required Harley to constantly ask guiding questions. After talking for a long time, Ron was parched. He drank some pumpkin juice and suddenly remembered something. "We've been talking for so long, and I still haven't asked your name." Harley suddenly felt a bit awkward. Because her first impression of this boy had been poor, she had forgotten to introduce herself. So, an apologetic expression appeared on her face, and she bowed slightly. "I'm very sorry, I forgot to mention my name. My name is Harley Potter. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Ron Weasley." Chapter 12. Why are you so confident? Hearing Harley's words, Ron's pupils dilated instantly, and he looked at her in disbelief. "You're Harley Potter, the girl who lived." Ron blurted out. "So it's true what the papers said. You really are a girl, and you're starting school this year. My mom thought the Daily Prophet was just making things up again. But how come I don't see the lightning-shaped scar on your forehead?" "That's right, it's me." Harley nodded, her expression turning slightly displeased. As for the scar, it was removed by a potion. After all, it was quite detrimental to one's appearance. It was clear that Ron had a bunch of questions he wanted to ask. But facing a girl, he really couldn't bring himself to ask them. Seeing that Ron stopped talking, Harley went back to eating her Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. She quite liked this snack with its variety of flavors. Hedwig also flew back in through the open train window, rubbing her head against Harley, begging for food. Before leaving the Dursleys' house, considering that bringing an owl into the station would be very eye-catching, Harley had chosen to let Hedwig out first. This bird, which understood human nature, had played outside all morning and finally remembered to come back to ask her owner for food. After all, what Harley fed Hedwig were high-quality nuts donated selflessly by Dudley, and owl wouldn't find such a delicacy in the wild. Ron looked at Hedwig with envy. The Weasley family couldn't afford an extra owl, so Ron only got the rat his brother had discarded. Ron had originally wanted to take the rat out, but thinking that girls usually hated rats, he could only let his scabbers continue to lie in his pocket. After enjoying lunch, Harley intended to continue her reading time, but someone knocked on the compartment door. "Come in," Harley shouted in a voice slightly louder than usual, while simultaneously giving this person a mental thumbs up. This is what you call having good manners. Knocking before entering, isn't that the most basic part of etiquette? A round-faced boy gently pulled open the door and walked in. His eyes were red and swollen, and there were still undried tears on his face. He had clearly just had a good cry. Sorry. The boy seemed a bit nervous when he saw Harley. I wanted to ask, have you seen my toad? It's a very ordinary-looking toad. I haven't seen it. Harley shook her head, and Ron also shook his head vigorously from the side. The boy started crying again. I'm so sorry. Sorry to bother you. I've lost it again. Saying this, the boy ran out, but he didn't forget to gently close the door before leaving. When the door collided with the doorframe, it didn't make a sound. Harley felt a bit of regret. Someone so well-mannered had left a good impression on her. If Harley had the ability, she wouldn't mind lending a helping hand. However, the potions of the witch pathway didn't give Harley the talent for divination. Although Harley could force herself to learn, the success rate was truly heartbreaking. Just as Harley lowered her head, the compartment door was slammed open, and the person's movements were extremely rough. The sliding door hit the frame heavily with a bang. Is there no end to this? And with such rough movements. Harley felt her anger rising, but she forcibly suppressed the displeasure in her heart and looked up at the compartment doorway. A little girl wearing a Hogwarts uniform was speaking to the round-faced boy from before. Neville, be brave. They responded to you so quickly, it's obvious they were just brushing you off and didn't look seriously at all. Watch me, I'll help you get justice. Saying this, the little girl looked into the compartment. That pair of large front teeth and bushy brown hair immediately caught Harley's eyes. Have any of you seen a toad? Neville has lost a toad. The girl said with her hands on her hips. Don't brush him off, please take your classmates' matters seriously. We've already told him, we didn't see it. Ron replied immediately, his tone not very friendly. However, the girl ignored him and kept scanning the compartment. It seemed she wasn't planning to leave until the people in the compartment had turned the place upside down. Harley ignored the girl, just glanced at her, and went back to reading. For such an arrogant and rude person, there was naturally no need to give her a pleasant look. Then why don't you get up and check? The young girl still had a condescending attitude as she looked at Harley. You being so indifferent, so casual, makes it hard for me to believe. Harley was momentarily stunned by Hermione's tone. Is the young girl in front of her an arbitrator? No, Sequence 9 arbitrators aren't this confident, at least they have to be in the right to speak like that. This would have to be at least a Sequence 7 interrogator to be able to use such an attitude to make asking others for help sound so matter-of-fact and righteous. Helping in this matter is a favor, not helping is the norm. Could one really force others to do it? Just as Harley was about to speak, there was new movement outside. Two tall and strong boys suddenly appeared, pushing the round-faced boy named Neville aside, and Hermione was also squeezed directly into the compartment. Subsequently, a pale-faced blonde boy emerged from between them. A red-headed Weasley, you must be Ron Weasley. The boy looked Ron over and said in an arrogant tone, your whole Weasley family gives off the same disgusting stench. Draco Malfoy, what are you doing here? Ron stood up immediately. He had wanted to spout some foul language, but thinking that the famous Harley was also in the compartment, he became much more civilized. Nothing much. I was just looking for Harley Potter, and it just so happens I see you here making friends with the fool from the Longbottom family, and there's even a Muggle-born sitting in the compartment. Malfoy glanced at the dress Harley was wearing and let out a mocking laugh. The Weasley family can only make friends with people like this to find a sense of superiority. After all, your family is dirt poor, but you're still much better than Muggles. Hearing Malfoy's words, a look of astonishment instantly appeared on Ron's face, which then turned into a strange expression mixed with anger and mockery. The anger was naturally because of Malfoy's insults to his family, and the mockery was because the Harley that Malfoy was looking for was sitting right there in the compartment. So, Mr. Malfoy, may I ask what you want with me? Harley wore a formulaic smile, but there was a trace of impatience in her eyes. By the way, I am the Harley Potter you were looking for. Oh, you're Harley Potter. The girl who lived. When Father told me about this, I thought he was lying to me. Malfoy still had that arrogant tone, but his gaze shifted to Harley. Then you shouldn't be wearing ridiculous Muggle clothing and making friends with such riff-raff. Malfoy glanced at Ron and shook his head. You should be making friends with a wizarding aristocrat like me. You have to know, even among wizarding families, there are differences. And aristocrats like us are the top tier among wizards. The smile on Harley's face could barely be maintained. If the Ron and Neville she met earlier were still within the category of normal people, then why were Hermione and Malfoy so confident? Chapter 13, Self-Defense. If she were still in her original world, Harley would have already frozen Malfoy into an ice sculpture. Does he not know that witches are petty? And here he is, provoking her like crazy. However, considering her current environment, Harley prepared to incite him verbally first. If the other party attacked first, then it would be self-defense. But before Harley could speak, Hermione, who had been pushed to the side, spoke first. You say you are a noble aristocrat. What era is this? In a time of equality, you still preach that aristocrats are noble. Even the greatest queen hasn't held power for a long time. Most aristocrats have already fallen. Although he couldn't fully understand what Hermione meant, Malfoy still managed to deduce that the girl in front of him was a Muggle-born wizard, and she was expressing her disdain for aristocrats. That just shows your vision is too limited. Malfoy said in a contemptuous tone. We are not the kind of aristocrats among Muggles that you speak of, but a pure-blood family with a long heritage in the wizarding world. Except for idiots like Longbottom and traitors like Weasley, everyone else is born noble. As he spoke, Malfoy looked Hermione up and down with disdain. Of course, this. Otter, miss, I don't expect your unintelligent brain to understand what I mean. After all, our levels are too far apart. It took Hermione a while to realize what Otter meant, and she couldn't help but tremble with anger. My name is Hermione Granger. Not some otter. Whatever, Malfoy shrugged, what does it matter to me what you are called? I don't have the leisure to learn your name. Anyway, judging by your big front teeth and messy hair, the name, Otter, suits your image very well. The two tall and strong boys next to him laughed in coordination, although they looked a bit silly. Harley couldn't help but rub her forehead. This Hermione didn't know how to argue at all. She couldn't grasp the key points of mocking someone. Mr. Malfoy, Harley took over control of the battlefield and said in a gentle voice. Although I don't know much about whether your identity is truly noble, judging by your words and behavior, I really cannot see it. I don't think a true aristocrat would be so vulgar in speech, nor do I believe an aristocrat would treat a lady unreasonably. Even if you are a fallen aristocrat who cannot manage these things, I think. Harley glanced at the two tall boys, her eyes full of contempt. At least you should learn to knock before entering a room. This should be the most basic upbringing, anyone with parents should understand this truth. As she said this, Harley suddenly had a realization, a finger gently pressing against her chin. Oh, perhaps you are an orphan. If that's the case, I must apologize to you. Because it's understandable that you have no upbringing. My condolences, but I still hope you can learn some etiquette. Of course, I cannot teach you, after all, I am not your parent. Harley's words, combined with the extraordinary ability of an instigator, instantly pushed Malfoy's anger to its peak. What Malfoy hated most was someone questioning the nobility of a pure blood. Under the teachings of his parents and the portraits of ancestors in Malfoy Manor, Malfoy had already memorized the nobility of pure blood. Now someone not only questioned his nobility but also insulted him for having no parents. How could the self-important Malfoy endure this? Malfoy felt a strange malice appearing in his heart, and his whole brain was telling him, beat her up. Let that who looks down on him get a sound beating. He didn't think too much, but directly shouted to the two boys beside him, Crabbe, Goyle, give her a taste of color. Let her dare to question the nobility of Malfoy. Crabbe and Goyle had always been obedient to Malfoy, and they walked to the front of Malfoy with a grin. Ron immediately stood up. What are you doing? Beating a girl. Hermione next to him let out a scream. Malfoy said loudly from behind, don't hesitate, beat that traitor of the Weasley family and the stinky mudblood together. Crabbe and Goyle looked at each other and immediately pounced fiercely, seemingly preparing to deal with Ron, who looked the most combat-capable, first. Harley was extremely happy in her heart. That little guy named Malfoy really had no resistance to her incitement spell. If I make a move now, it counts as self-defense. Thinking this, Harley raised her hand. The spirituality on her body was rapidly consumed, and the whole compartment fell into coldness. Crabbe and Goyle found they couldn't move, their hands and feet covered in a layer of frost. The two couldn't help but panic, starting to yell, but were immediately punched in the face by Ron. And screaming along with them was Malfoy. Neville, who had been pushed aside earlier, didn't know when he had climbed up and pressed down fiercely on Malfoy, saying angrily, I do not allow you to insult my parents. Absolutely not allowed. Malfoy had his feet frozen by Harley and didn't expect that the silly-looking Longbottom would suddenly attack him, so he was pressed directly to the ground. Hermione watched this scene and couldn't help but scream, stop, stop it. Don't fight anymore. But no one paid attention to her. Harley had already swapped her homemade wand for that snakewood wand. At this time, she was gently waving her wand, guiding the frost to further cover Malfoy and the other two. Crabbe had already been punched in the nose by Ron, causing a nosebleed, while Goyle's fingers were bleeding from being bitten by a mouse in Ron's pocket. Such a big commotion in the compartment caused little wizards in the surrounding compartments to curiously poke their heads out. Some who weren't afraid of trouble even ran over to watch this big melee, pointing fingers constantly. At this moment, a flash of fire suddenly appeared outside the door, and Professor Dumbledore appeared in the train corridor. A large golden red bird stood on his shoulder. After seeing Professor Dumbledore clearly, many little wizards shrank their heads in fear and obediently returned to their seats. The few onlookers stood blankly in place, afraid that the principal would give them detention. Professor Dumbledore ignored them and waved the wand in his hand. The 5 people fighting in the compartment were instantly separated, and the frost on Malfoy and the other 2 disappeared directly. Professor Dumbledore then looked at Harley. "Harley, what is going on?" Harley didn't hide anything and immediately told the truth objectively and impartially, from the time she boarded the train until the professor arrived. When narrating, Harley's voice was always very soft, appearing very weak and helpless. The only thing she hid was that she had cast a small incitement spell. Anyway, this ability basically would not have spiritual residue, and the frost coverage just now completely prevented any divination that Dumbledore might have cast, if he knew how. Dumbledore frowned. He had been secretly monitoring the train, so naturally, he knew that what Harley said was completely in line with the facts. Malfoy provoked first, was shamed into anger after Harley retorted, used insulting words, and let his followers beat people. And Ron, in order to protect the girl, and Neville, who should also have been defending his friend, fought with Malfoy and the 2 others. Harley had cast some strange magic in it, helping Ron and Neville not take too much damage. This matter seemed very reasonable, but out of the intuition of an old man who had lived for a long time, Dumbledore always felt that something was wrong. Chapter 14. The rules are on my side. Dumbledore quietly cast several spells, but detected nothing. After a moment of thought, he made his judgment. "Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, you insulted a fellow student and initiated a physical altercation, and were bullying a female student. According to school rules, you deserve punishment. Considering you haven't been sorted into houses yet, I will not deduct house points. However, after sorting, the 3 of you will report to your dean for a month of detention. Once your sorting results are out, I will inform your dean of the specific situation, and he will make the final decision." Upon hearing Dumbledore's disciplinary decision, the corners of Harley's mouth curled up slightly. "As expected, as long as I act according to the rules are on my side. Dumbledore is merely a prisoner of the rules." Dumbledore continued, "I will also write to the parents of everyone involved in this fight, and record everything you have done in full." As he spoke, Dumbledore glanced at Harley and the others. Harley appeared shaken, but in reality, she couldn't care less. Regardless, the Dursleys wouldn't care if Harley got into a fight, and they didn't have the guts to reprimand her anyway. Ron also held his head high, looking quite proud, seemingly unafraid of his parents' reprimand. However, Neville didn't think so. He stood frozen in place, then began to shiver, though it was unclear what he was afraid of. Malfoy was clearly unconvinced, but lacking the courage to speak up in front of Dumbledore, he merely opened his mouth, "My father." Then, his voice trailed off until it was inaudible, and he quickly fled the compartment with Crabbe and Goyle. Dumbledore took one last look at Harley, then patted the bird on his shoulder. "The train will arrive soon, you had better get changed into your school uniforms. Fox, let's go." The golden red bird was leisurely preening its feathers. Upon hearing Dumbledore's words, it let out a low chirp. Man and bird instantly turned into a flash of fire and vanished from the spot. Ron rubbed his arm and plopped back into his seat. That was where Crabbe had punched him hard. He couldn't be bothered to check his injury and asked Harley excitedly, "Harley, what magic did you cast just now? You froze Malfoy and the others in an instant." Harley was wiping her wand with a handkerchief. Hearing Ron's question, she answered without looking up, "Talent. I was born with it." A look of obvious envy appeared in Ron's eyes. "That's so cool. I've heard that some wizards are gifted, able to perform certain specific magic from birth. If only I could do that, then I could beat up Malfoy and his cronies anytime, anywhere." Hermione, who had been ignored for a long time, interjected, "Cool. How can you say that?" The girl looked extremely angry. "You are violating school rules. You haven't even started school yet and you're already breaking the rules." "Oh, Miss Granger, then I'd like to ask, what would you do? Just talk them away with your mouth," Ron said sarcastically, clearly dissatisfied that Hermione had not stood on their side earlier. "Of course, wait for a professor to handle it. It's wrong of them to hit you, but you retaliated, and that counts as breaking the rules." Harley smiled silently, tucking her wiped wand back into her pocket. Hermione really has that standard commoner mindset, always looking for a professor when in doubt. As a powerhouse of the witch sequence, skilled at manipulating hearts and minds, Harley could already foresee that Miss Hermione's future days would certainly not be easy. "Miss Granger, could you please leave our compartment?" Harley packed her luggage and said softly. "Why? I haven't finished speaking yet." Hermione put her hands on her hips, looking just like an angry lion. "No, I mean I need to change into my school uniform," Harley said, gesturing to her long dress. Hermione was momentarily speechless, then silently left the compartment. Neville had already left at some point. Ron whistled. "Well done, Harley. You got rid of that annoying person so easily." Harley gave Ron a strange look. This red-haired boy was certainly quick to get familiar. Did she ever allow him to call her by her first name? "So, are you not leaving?" Harley pointed to the door, "or do you want to watch me change?" The last sentence carried a hint of killing intent. Ron suddenly realized that the person in front of him was a girl. "I'm leaving now." Ron laughed awkwardly, grabbed his school uniform, and left the compartment. Harley nodded with satisfaction. The train arrived at the station. It was pitch black outside and very cold. However, thanks to the assassin sequence, Harley not only ditched her glasses but also solidified eagle-like vision and dark vision, and her physical fitness had been greatly enhanced. So, the harsh environment outside had no effect on Harley whatsoever. A booming voice rang out, "First years. First years over here. Harley, are you there? Come over here, will you?" Harley looked in the direction of the voice. A giant, 3.5 meters tall, stood there holding a lantern. A human with giant blood. Or a dwarf among giants. Harley speculated as she walked over. "Hello, who are you?" Harley squeezed to the giant's feet. "I just heard you calling my name." The giant looked down at Harley, grinned, and reached out to ruffle her hair, but Harley dodged it. The giant didn't mind and introduced himself to Harley. "My name is Rubius Hagrid, the keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. Originally, I was supposed to take you to Diagon Alley. I begged Professor Dumbledore for a long time. Unfortunately, Professor Dumbledore ended up taking over the task." As he spoke, Hagrid sighed, then shouted, "Are all the first years here? Come on, follow me. Watch your step." With that, Hagrid walked in a certain direction. The group slowly made their way along a narrow, steep path, and Hagrid chatted with Harley, inviting her to come play at his hut after school started. Harley happened to want to learn some information about Hogwarts from this half-giant, so she naturally nodded in agreement. Hagrid brought the new students to the lakeshore, where they were to take boats across the lake. Each boat could accommodate 4 people. Harley vaguely remembered that in Hogwarts, a history, it was recorded that when the 4 founders first arrived on the land where Hogwarts now stands, they did so by boat. If Harley recalled correctly, this belonged to a type of mystical ritual. By repeatedly imitating the past actions of certain great old ones, one could borrow their power or form a contract. And Harley did indeed feel an invisible contract forming, though the content of the contract was not yet clear. Furthermore, were these 4 founders all great old ones? To use such a ritual, the object of imitation would at least need to be an earthly angel, that is, a powerhouse at the Sequence 1 and Sequence 2 levels. Harley sat in the boat, trailing her hand in the lake water, letting her thoughts wander. Hogwarts was truly wondrous, there were too many secrets hidden here. Chapter 15, The Sorting Ceremony, Revised. The small boat soon carried the first years to the far side of the lake. Under Hagrid's guidance, everyone walked all the way to the front of Hogwarts Castle. The school's deputy principal, Professor McGonagall, was standing there. She led everyone into a small, empty room, said a few brief words, and then left. The first years began to whisper to each other, discussing how the upcoming sorting would proceed. These first years had already learned about the 4 houses at home or on the train, knew their characteristics, and had their own goals in mind. Therefore, they certainly did not want to be sorted into a house they didn't want to go to because of school policy. Unfortunately, none of the sorting methods mentioned by everyone were the same. It seemed as though everyone who had already been sorted intentionally refrained from telling the first years the correct way. Ron had been following Harley since getting off the train, and at this moment, he asked her again, "Harley, which house do you want to go to?" "Either is fine. Anyway, we don't have the final say, it depends on the school's assignment." Harley was resting with her eyes closed and answered offhandedly without even opening them. Harley didn't care where she would be sorted. After all, according to Hogwarts, a history, these 4 houses were just different places to live with different course schedules, and there was no difference in the content learned. It wasn't like the northern continent, where choosing a different church meant following a different pathway. So, Harley looked indifferent. If she really had to deduce the house she might go to, based on the school's representative animals, Harley believed there was a high probability she would go to Slytherin. After all, the mythical creature form of a witch is a gorgon. Furthermore, she seemed to fit the shrewdness and ambition of Slytherin house, and she didn't lack cunning. Slytherin, moreover, would not reject the dark arts. No matter how she looked at it, Slytherin was very suitable for her. However, the qualities valued by Gryffindor also seemed to fit her situation, as this house valued courage most of all. One had to know that Harley had defected from the Demonist sect, a cult that served the evil god, the primordial witch. The fact that Harley had the courage to defect from such a sect back then felt incredible just thinking about it. It was definitely commendable courage. Of course, Ravenclaw was not impossible either. After all, Harley was very passionate about mystical knowledge, even more so than many seers. Only Hufflepuff. In any case, the witch pathway, with its core of pain and despair, didn't seem to have anything in common with the honest and loyal Hufflepuff. Harley stopped overthinking and continued to rest with her eyes closed. Anyway, no matter where she was sorted, it couldn't be worse than starting in the Demonist sect, and just becoming ageless, then encountering Aemon. Of course, there was an even worse situation, but Harley didn't continue to think about it. After a while, Professor McGonagall walked into the group in a hurry. "Apologies, students," Professor McGonagall said, "there was a small accident just now. The school stairs suddenly changed direction, so it took me a while to retrieve the sorting hat. Everyone, hurry up and get in line, single file, and follow me." Professor McGonagall led the first years into the Great Hall. Tens of thousands of candles floated above the hall, and the ceiling sparkled with starlight. The first years lined up in front of a four-legged stool, on which sat a pointed wizard's hat. The hat suddenly opened its mouth and began to sing, though the singing was truly awful. In Harley's memory, the last person whose singing was this bad was a tyrant pathway ocean songster, who seemed to be from the Church of Storms. That irritable fellow became Harley's first trophy after advancing to Sequence 4, and she sold him for a good price to a blue-haired ghost ship captain. After the hat finished singing, the first years finally understood that they only needed to put on the hat to be sorted. Many people gritted their teeth, vowing to teach their older brothers and sisters a lesson when they got back for tricking them. Professor McGonagall stood out holding a roll of parchment. "Whoever I call now, put on the hat, sit on the stool, and wait for the sorting." Subsequently, Professor McGonagall called out the first name, Hannah Abbott. The sorting continued, and the number of first years gradually decreased. Not many of the first years received Harley's attention. Perhaps Malfoy could barely count as one. That Malfoy, who had been influenced by Harley's incitement, and his two lackeys all went to Slytherin, which Harley found quite amusing. Does Slytherin not check for intelligence when recruiting? Those three didn't seem to have good brains. It didn't fit Slytherin's so-called shrewdness and cunning. Not necessarily. Perhaps the platinum-haired Malfoy in the middle was only influenced by the education he received, which led to his brainless actions. Harley had seen such cases many times before. Finally, Professor McGonagall called Harley. "Harley Potter." Noisy discussions immediately erupted in the Great Hall, and everyone's gaze was fixed on Harley. However, Harley only noticed 3 of those gazes, and only these 3 gazes caused a reaction in her spiritual intuition. Harley ignored those gazes and automatically shut out the noise, examining the dirty hat. "So dirty," Harley muttered, then gritted her teeth and put the hat on her head. Letting this hat touch her black hair was truly a form of torture. "I am not dirty," a tiny voice sounded, "I am the cleanest hat in the world." A sealed artifact from the spectator pathway. The thought had just risen in Harley's mind before she immediately suppressed it. Facing a magical item that might have mind-reading abilities, the best way to deal with it was to keep her mind blank. "As long as I don't think about anything, your mind-reading won't work." "Mind-reading?" the tiny voice continued. "No, I don't know that trick. Gryffindor didn't attach legitimacy to me. I can only sense some superficial thoughts." "All right, Miss Harley, we have been dwelling on irrelevant matters for too long. Let me see where you are suited to go." Harley immediately began to empty her mind, focusing her spirituality to cover up the thoughts of slaughter and destruction in her mind. "Insidious, cunning, very suitable for Slytherin," the hat muttered, "but also very brave, and very smart, fond of reading. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw are both suitable for you. So where should I go?" Harley chimed in at the right moment. This would make the other party feel she wasn't talking to herself, thereby making it more interested in continuing. "I would quite like to let you choose for yourself, but I can't. After all, this is my duty." "That's right, just like this," the sorting hat muttered to itself in Harley's mind. "Gryffindor." The last word was shouted out loud by the sorting hat, and thunderous applause immediately erupted from the Gryffindor table. Two boys jumped up and cheered, throwing something into the air, though Harley didn't notice. She stood up elegantly, returned the hat to Professor McGonagall, and at the same time, thin black flames burned on her hair, incinerating any dust left by the hat. As she walked toward the Gryffindor table, Harley's thoughts were not on this. There were a few gazes around that made her very concerned. Harley sat at the very front of the Gryffindor long table, exchanged a few polite words with the people around her, and then looked toward the faculty table. A white-haired old man was applauding for her and looking at her kindly. His gaze was exactly one of the three gazes Harley had sensed earlier. After all, that was the gaze of a demigod powerhouse. The spirituality of the witch pathway is quite strong, so it was impossible for Harley not to notice. Chapter 16. Two demigods and still not safe. Earlier, Harley had sensed three gazes from the direction of the teacher's table, gazes that had caused a certain reaction in her spirituality. One of them belonged to Dumbledore, which was normal. After all, that old man had already reached the powerful level of a demigod. The gaze of a demigod-level powerhouse would not leave even the demoness of Unaging indifferent, let alone Harley, who was currently just a weak witch. Another gaze came from a man with a hooked nose. His skin was sallow, his hair greasy, and he looked like someone who neither cared for his physical health nor practiced personal hygiene. This gave Harley a terrible first impression. If a person didn't practice hygiene and didn't even cherish their own body, what else would they cherish? Moreover, he was staring at Harley very rudely, his expression appearing extremely agitated and excited. Upon noticing that Harley was also looking at him, the man even smiled at her. In particular, the man's gaze contained a series of very complex emotions. However, Harley was not on the spectator pathway, so she couldn't interpret too much information, only barely managing to sense a kind of twisted affection from it. This gave Harley the illusion that she was still the pleasure witch and had activated her supernatural charm ability. What a pervert, Harley muttered to herself. A senior student next to her leaned over and asked, "Miss Potter, what did you just say?" "It's nothing. Senior, may I ask your name?" The senior smiled. "My name is Angelina Johnson, you can just call me Angelina." Harley nodded. "Hello, senior. You can just call me Harley." "Thank you very much, Harley." Angelina smiled as she looked Harley over. "I really didn't expect you to be such a beautiful girl. We originally thought you would be a handsome young lad. It seems the Daily Prophet occasionally tells the truth. If you have any questions, you can come to me, and I will answer them for you as best as I can." "Thank you, Sister Angelina." Harley nodded obediently and said sweetly. Angelina was instantly charmed, feeling as if she were facing a cute kitten. She really wanted to take Harley into her arms and rub that beautiful hair just like petting a cat. So cute. Angelina managed to resist the urge to ruffle Harley's hair. "If anyone dares to provoke you, just tell me, and I'll call the seniors from Gryffindor to beat them up. Hurry up and eat, the food will be cold soon." As she spoke, Angelina pointed to the steak in front of Harley. "Try this steak, it's delicious with black pepper sauce." Only then did Harley realize that the sorting ceremony had completely ended, and there was plenty of delicious food in front of her. All the students were tucking into their meals. Harley served herself 2 pieces of steak, drizzled them with sauce, and while eating in small bites, she continued to watch the teacher's table from the corner of her eye. Among the previous gazes, if the first 2 were relatively friendly, the last one was extremely cold and had triggered her spiritual warning. Although that gaze had already vanished, Harley had barely managed to remember its position and found the person at the teacher's table. It was a pale young man with a thick scarf wrapped around his head. It was inconvenient to observe from Harley's angle, but she could barely make out that he had wrapped up his entire back of his head. At this moment, he was nodding and bowing while speaking to the black-haired teacher who had been watching Harley earlier, his whole body slightly hunched as if he were very afraid of that teacher. From the shape of his mouth while speaking, Harley could determine that the teacher wrapped in the scarf seemed to have a bit of a stutter. However, Harley didn't dare to underestimate him at all, because no one dared to underestimate a demigod. Yes, the professor wrapped in the scarf seemed to be a demigod-level powerhouse. But Harley felt a bit strange. When that professor looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her had brought Harley a spiritual warning. But now, when Harley watched that professor again, she didn't receive any warnings at all. After all, the witch pathway also belonged to the spellcasting type with strong intuition, and Harley had even spent a long time at the demigod level. Therefore, logically speaking, as Harley watched that demigod professor, even without activating her spirit vision, she should have received some alerts. "Sister," watching the senior Angelina beside her finish what she was eating, Harley quickly asked in a soft, sweet voice. "Who is that professor with the scarf wrapped around his head? And who is that hook-nosed professor next to him who doesn't wash his hair?" Angelina pulled back her hand, which was about to reach for a kidney pie, looked at the teacher's table, and said to Harley in a near whisper. That professor with the scarf wrapped around his head is our defense against the dark arts professor, Professor Quirrell. He was originally responsible for teaching us Muggle studies, having held this position since he just graduated 5 years ago. However, he resigned after teaching for 3 years, went out for a long period of travel, then returned to Hogwarts and applied for the defense against the dark arts position. It just so happened that the previous defense against the dark arts professor, Professor Lockhart, had left without saying goodbye, so Professor Quirrell got the job. Angelina paused, looked at the hook-nosed professor, and told Harley in an even lower voice. That professor with the hooked nose who doesn't like to wash his hair is the Dean of Slytherin, and also our potion class professor, Professor Snape. Speaking of this, Angelina frowned. This professor doesn't like Gryffindor and often uses all sorts of bizarre excuses to deduct points from Gryffindor. Then he probably doesn't like me either. Harley nodded and said thoughtfully. Earlier, he kept looking at me, and he stared straight into my eyes. His gaze was really annoying. Angelina smiled. It's fine. Although Professor Snape is very excessive, he at most deducts points, he won't harm students. Or rather, no one in the school would harm students. Students are absolutely safe from life-threatening danger at Hogwarts. This is the safest school in the whole world. Indeed, Harley muttered in her heart. After all, being able to staff a demigod-level powerhouse and a suspected demigod-level powerhouse, this school must be safe. Coupled with this castle full of spirituality, or rather, magic, even if an earthly angel were to attack, it could probably hold out for a while. Harley stopped asking and began to eat quickly. She gently cut the steak, eating only a small bite at a time, and chewed with her mouth closed. However, Harley's heart was not as calm as her surface appearance, because after all, there was such a strange demigod lurking nearby, and he even harbored malice toward her. She had to find a way to recover her strength as soon as possible. She hadn't expected this world to be not so safe either. Harley secretly made up her mind and prepared to devote more time to potions. Chapter 17 Ghosts and Spirit World Creatures. The feast was still underway, and the ghosts of Hogwarts had also joined the banquet. They kept popping up in front of the first years, trying to give them a scare. A ghost with a rough collar drifted in front of Harley, watching her slice her steak, and said sadly, "That looks really good. Are you creatures of the spirit world?" Harley asked subconsciously, looking at the pearly white, translucent ghost before her. Creatures of the spirit world. What is that? Is that what Muggles call us? The ghost frowned, then introduced himself. I am a ghost, Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington, the resident ghost of Gryffindor Tower. You may call me Sir Nicholas. As he spoke, the ghost straightened his collar. Harley then remembered that while waiting in that small room before the sorting, some first years had indeed shouted the word, ghost. However, she had been closing her eyes to rest at the time and hadn't paid much attention to the sounds outside. Harley suddenly became interested in the ghost. She put down her knife and fork, wiped her hands with a handkerchief, and began to converse with Sir Nicholas. Respected Sir Nicholas, may I ask you a few questions? Of course you may. Sir Nicholas replied happily. Child, feel free to ask. As long as it is something I know, I can tell you. You are truly a delightful little wizard. Other little wizards only call me Nick or use my nickname, and they don't like to chat with me. That is truly unfortunate. Harley sighed casually, took out a notebook and a Muggle pen, and began to ask, Sir Nicholas, may I ask how you became a spirit? I mean, a ghost. Oh, that is a very long story. Nick seemed to want to launch into a long-winded lecture, starting from his own birth. However, Harley swiftly cut him off. Sir Nicholas, I don't think the banquet will last long enough. If the topic is too long, we will have to discuss it another time. Nick seemed disappointed, but he had to choose to make a long story short. Alright, I will get straight to the point. Wizards can leave a mark on this world. And when they die, if they fear death, they can choose to become a ghost, continuing to walk in the places where they once lived and left their mark. If one chooses to become a ghost in this way, they must live on as a ghost forever and cannot continue on the journey after death. Of course, for those who die unnaturally and have very strong emotions, especially resentment, before they die, it is also possible for them to become ghosts. And they still have a chance to choose to move on, but it requires meeting certain opportunities. May I ask what kind of opportunities those are? Harley asked a new question while taking notes rapidly. I do not know. Nick shook his head. Not many people have explored this question, as there are too few of such ghosts. Harley nodded thoughtfully, and after learning quite a bit more information, she ended the conversation and expressed her gratitude to Nick. By this time, the banquet had reached its end, and the main courses and desserts on the table had disappeared. Professor Dumbledore stood up, raised a few points of attention, and asked everyone to sing the school song together before going to bed. However, the singing was truly indescribable, worse than the Sorting Hat by 2 ocean singers' distance. The fifth-year prefects began leading the first years back to their house dormitories. The entrance to the Gryffindor dormitory was located on a corridor on the 8th floor. There was a portrait on the corridor, depicting a very plump woman in pink clothes. According to the prefect Percy, the entrance to the Gryffindor tower was behind this portrait, and the fat lady in the portrait was the guardian of Gryffindor. Only by saying the correct password to the fat lady could one enter the Gryffindor tower. After entering the Gryffindor tower, there was the Gryffindor common room. Usually, Gryffindor students could choose to study here. After a brief introduction, Percy guided the girls through a door, that was the girls' dormitory. However, Percy did not follow, he just stood outside the door. The remaining work was completed by a female prefect who had lacked presence earlier. She held a scroll of parchment and pointed out the beds to the first years. Harley shared a dormitory with the very arrogant Hermione, who had left a deep impression on her on the train. Also in the same room were Parvati Patil and Lavender Brown. Harley's luggage was already at the head of her bed. After the roommates introduced themselves simply, Harley quickly tidied up her bedding and set up the curtains. After washing up, Harley did not pay attention to the still chattering Hermione, quickly lay on the bed, and performed a simple tranquility ritual to shut out Hermione's voice. It was already late. Harley lay on the bed, pondering what she had seen and heard today, especially those ghosts. After all, ghosts existed in a form almost like spirit bodies, just unable to interfere with reality, which was slightly different from spirit bodies. Did this prove that this world also had a spirit world or a place similar to a spirit world? Harley was very curious now, especially wanting to perform a small ritual to let her own spirit body directly enter the spirit world. However, Harley was not that reckless. With her current strength, she did not dare to enter directly. If the spirit world of this world was as dangerous as the spirit world of the sequence pathway world, then Harley could be wiped out by some behemoth at any time after entering. Forcing herself to suppress the curiosity in her heart, Harley chose to go to sleep quickly, lest she unfold some ritual because she could not stop her curiosity. In the headmaster's office, the Sorting Hat was forcibly engaging the principal in awkward small talk. "Albus, that little girl Harley is truly interesting," the Sorting Hat said with great interest. "It has been a long time since I have seen someone suitable for 3 houses at the same time. The last such person was over 10 years ago." Indeed, Dumbledore flipped through the Transmigration today in his hand without raising his head. "She is a gifted child, is she not? And she hides many secrets. However, I estimate that she herself does not know the secrets she carries. Yes, she is indeed a good child. It would be better if she didn't dislike me so much." Speaking of this, the Sorting Hat even simulated a sobbing sound. "I originally wanted to put that child into Slytherin. After all, that child is more suitable for Slytherin. But you insisted that I put her into Gryffindor." Speaking of this, there was even a hint of resentment in the Sorting Hat's voice. "This is not my fault, old friend." Dumbledore turned a page of Transfiguration today and replied casually, "When I went to pick her up, what that child said to me was too concerning. If I am not mistaken, the facts that child described refer to some traits of Tom being attached to her. Now those traits have been destroyed for some reason, or rather, merged with Harley. So now she has mastered many special magic, and their essence is somewhat evil, leaning towards dark arts. I must ensure that Harley is in an environment full of courage and love to ensure the child's healthy growth. This is my duty as a principal, and also my atonement as an elder for the mistakes I made. It was my mistake back then, deciding to use the wrong person, which caused the death of Harley's parents." Chapter 18, Professors of Hogwarts, slightly revised. Phew. Harley sat up abruptly in bed, wiping the sweat from her forehead with force. The sky outside had not yet fully brightened. Checking the mechanical watch Aunt Petunia had gifted her, it showed that it was only a little past 5. A look of lingering fear remained on Harley's face. After all, the dream just now had been too realistic. Damn it, she had dreamed of those days being hunted by Eamon again. Although the suffering was in the past, Harley would still occasionally have such nightmares. Harley rubbed her face vigorously, her hands imbued with frost, to make herself more alert. Then Harley realized that this was just a dream. Although dreams experienced by Beyonders have certain symbolic meanings, that is because the world of sequence pathways has the spirit world. In that world, the astral spirit roams the spirit world, allowing certain details usually noticed unconsciously to be transformed into symbolic revelations under external stimulation, which are then told to the spirit body itself and presented in the form of a dream. This world does not have a spirit world, or at least there is a high probability it does not, so probably, perhaps, FK. Harley still could not calm down and ultimately decided to perform a divination. The potion of the witch pathway does not grant Harley divination abilities or a superior talent for learning divination, it only provides a certain degree of anti-divination capability upon reaching sequence 7 witch. But this does not mean Harley cannot actively learn divination rituals, only that the success rate is rather pathetic. Harley quickly took out various materials and performed several divinations in succession to determine if Eamon had followed her here. Unsurprisingly, the divinations all failed. However, this was due to a lack of information. Harley had completely calmed down by now, closing her eyes to think about the current situation. Eamon cannot follow me here, after all, he is at that level, likely plotting against true gods above sequence 1. If he had really followed me here, he wouldn't come looking for me again, because his interest in capturing me was purely due to the aura of the otherworld on me. Even if I take a step back, even if he really followed me here and was interested in me, wanting to capture me for research, he would have done so long ago. Harley pondered continuously, finally concluding that Eamon had not followed her, and even if he had, he would no longer pose a threat to her. Relax, completely forget about those things. I am safe now. Thinking of this, Harley opened her eyes with relief, got dressed, and went to wash up. Since she was already up, she might as well go to the Great Hall to read. Relying on the powerful memory and sense of direction granted by Assassin, Harley easily found the Great Hall. It was still early, and the Great Hall was empty. Harley did not mind, silently opening her bag and taking out her potion class textbook to read slowly. As time slowly passed, others entered the Great Hall. The professor who had looked at Harley rudely yesterday arrived. Professor Snape entered through the main door of the Great Hall and, when passing by Harley, quietly glanced at the textbook she was reading. Seeing Harley circling and marking the key steps for brewing potions in the textbook, Professor Snape nodded with satisfaction and then strode back to the teacher's table. Harley curiously glanced at Professor Snape, a thought flashing through her mind. Professor Snape's seat at the teacher's table was clearly closer to the Slytherin table, so why did he detour past the Gryffindor table? However, Harley did not think too much about it, because milk, bread, and sandwiches had already appeared on the table in front of her. Breakfast had begun. The number of people in the Great Hall gradually increased, and many people cast their gazes toward Harley while eating, whispering incessantly. Harley did not like this feeling, so she quickly finished breakfast and then headed to the classroom. The first day of school happened to be a Monday, September 2, 1991, verifiable by calendar. According to common practice, the professors of each house would distribute the class schedules. However, Professor McGonagall was very meticulous. She seemed to have anticipated that on the first day, there would definitely be new students who could not find their way to the Great Hall, resulting in them not getting their schedules. Therefore, she had used magic to place the new students' schedules at their bedsides a day in advance. The first class of the morning was herbology class, and the professor was the dean of Hufflepuff, Professor Pomona Sprout. To be honest, Harley felt that this professor was like a planter or a druid. Professor Sprout was short and stout, wearing wizard robes stained with mud, which had also been modified to be suitable for walking on muddy paths. The professor's hands were covered in calluses, and her shoes were also caked with mud, dirty and messy, without any shoe covers. Harley was very interested in this class. After all, the most important materials for brewing potions were various herbs. And Professor Sprout's attainments were also very high, as she knew many very rare materials. When Harley went to ask about some questions she had discovered while reading during the holidays, the professor easily answered all of Harley's queries and hinted that Harley could join her herbology club if she had the opportunity. There was only one history of magic class in the afternoon. The professor for this class was Professor Binns, a ghost. During class, he always spoke continuously in his monotonous, boring voice, never caring whether the students could keep up with his train of thought, and his voice was hypnotic, comparable to a hypnotist of the spectator pathway. Under the influence of his voice, a large number of students fell asleep. If Professor Binns were on the spectator pathway, then a sequence 6 hypnotist would have no need to act at all. Only Harley and Hermione, who were sitting in the front row, were not asleep and were listening to the professor's lecture attentively. Harley never looked down on history classes. In the world of sequence pathways, history has always contained a large number of secrets and paths to becoming stronger. Harley had already browsed through the thick book, History of Magic. Although the book seemed to only speak of some ordinary historical events, it contained many key pieces of information. Unfortunately, Professor Binns just read from the book and did not add his own viewpoints, which made Harley quite disappointed. And the fact that Professor Binns would walk through the wall as soon as class ended made Harley very uncomfortable. Harley had even wanted to use her excellent eloquence to try and pry more secret history from Professor Binns's mouth. Tuesday morning was herbology class and charms class. The professor for charms class was Phileas Flitwick. This professor was not tall and needed to stand on books during class. Listening to the students of Ravenclaw, this professor had goblin blood. Moreover, he seemed very sensitive. When he called Harley's name, he was so excited that he fell off the stack of books. However, Professor Flitwick was very strong, and various spells came easily to him. Among them, many spells, although looking ordinary and only usable in daily life, had Harley thinking of many wonderful uses. For example, if a sufficiently strong person used Alohomora against the gate where the underworld and spirit world overlapped, created by the gatekeeper of the death pathway, one would not know what would happen. Harley guessed it would be very interesting. Perhaps it would forcibly open that gate, releasing undead far exceeding the rank of the gatekeeper. Unfortunately, this conjecture could not be realized. The defense against the dark arts class on Wednesday morning was the one Harley looked forward to most. After all, Professor Quirrell was a demigod powerhouse. Unfortunately, this professor seemed to be narrow-minded, teaching no extra knowledge other than stammeringly reading the textbook. Coupled with the fact that his gaze toward Harley was always filled with malice, it made Harley's spirituality warn her frantically, and she did not want to have any contact with him at all. The dream about Aemon could not be changed. Otherwise, deleting a large section of the plot would make this chapter less than 1,000 words, and it would not be able to be published. Just pretend Harley had an ordinary nightmare. Chapter 19. The upcoming potion class. However, Harley still couldn't quite figure one thing out. Although Harley dared not use spirit vision to observe Professor Quirrell, low-sequence powerhouses would subconsciously feel oppressed when seeing a demigod. Yet, when Harley looked at this professor, she never felt any oppression. Only when Professor Quirrell's gaze swept over her would Harley's spirituality trigger a warning. Although her strength was gone, Harley's knowledge and insight remained. She thought of many situations across various sequence pathways where this phenomenon could occur. For example, if this professor was not a demigod but was merely controlled by a powerhouse at the demigod level. Such as being possessed or manipulated by a marionette of the prisoner pathway, being turned into a marionette by a bizarro sorcerer of the seer pathway, or being parasitized by a parasite of the marauder pathway. Although these situations were difficult to discern directly, when that demigod-level powerhouse stared at others through the eyes of the person they controlled, harboring great malice, those with stronger spirituality could keenly perceive this malice and trigger their own spiritual warnings. Therefore, Harley decided to stay away from Professor Quirrell as much as possible. Although she didn't know if magic could actually achieve this, keeping her distance was always the right choice. Consequently, Harley had no intention of asking Professor Quirrell any questions. She would quickly leave the classroom as soon as class ended and decided to sit in the back row from then on, avoiding being alone with Professor Quirrell. If there was one class among all her courses that Harley found most unfathomable, it was Transfiguration class. When Harley first saw the textbook, she had once thought that the vast majority of people in this world possessed strength above that of a demigod. What was Transfiguration? It was turning one object into another. In the sequence pathways, there were not many sequences capable of doing this, and each possessed immense power. Those who could do this as effortlessly as Professor McGonagall cast her spells were mostly powerhouses who had reached sequence 4. For those below demigod level, it wasn't impossible, but it required expending a significant amount of spirituality and setting up curse rituals. It was very troublesome, unlike the ease of transfiguration. However, as Harley continued reading, she discovered that this type of transformation was actually a very idealistic spell, and most of the time, it posed no threat. This made Harley heave a sigh of relief. If everyone in this world were as strong as the visionary angel Adam, then Harley wouldn't bother unsealing her strength and would just focus on the magic system. On Tuesday, during the first Transfiguration class, Professor McGonagall demonstrated her specialty to all the little wizards, a spell called Animagus. Before class began, Professor McGonagall had turned into a cat, sitting quietly on the desk at the front of the classroom. Many students thought the professor hadn't arrived, so they were playing and making noise, with some even wanting to pet the cat. Of course, they didn't succeed. Harley, however, sensed that something was wrong with the cat before her. After all, that kind of human-like, serious gaze was very uncommon in a cat. Furthermore, when using spirit vision to observe the cat, the rich range of emotions was not something an animal could possess. Just as Harley expected, as soon as class began, Professor McGonagall transformed back into her original form, giving many people a fright. Several students, recalling their attempts to pet the cat before class, couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. That was dancing on the edge of death. Professor McGonagall repeatedly emphasized the difficulty of transfiguration in class and demonstrated turning the desk into a pig, then turning it back. Harley was very shocked when she saw this, especially when she noticed that the pig was grunting and trying to run out of the classroom. Was this creating a living object from an inanimate one? Did the conjured pig also have self-awareness? Harley pondered this, writing it down as she did so, intending to slowly investigate it when she had the chance in the future. The first class did not cover such profound knowledge. After teaching a bunch of basic magic theories regarding transfiguration, Professor McGonagall handed every student a matchstick. Now, you must use these simple magic theories and the incantations from your textbook to turn the matchstick into a needle. Professor McGonagall said, pointing her wand at the notes on the blackboard, which were complex and profound for most people. However, it seemed this task was not as simple as Professor McGonagall claimed. By the time the class ended, most students' matchsticks hadn't changed at all. Only the matchsticks of Harley and Hermione had undergone slight changes. Hermione had managed to turn one end of the matchstick into a needle point, but the other end was still wood. As for Harley, she had successfully turned her matchstick into a silver needle on her third attempt. "Harley, how did you do it?" Hermione, sitting beside her, asked curiously. After spending some time together, Harley realized that Hermione's nature was not bad, just that her emotional intelligence was a bit low. Therefore, Harley was naturally quite willing to interact with such a high IQ talent. After all, the others in Gryffindor were just reckless lions. Take that Ron, for example. He was late for the very first class of the term and would play wizard chess in the common room whenever he had free time. Such a decadent attitude was something Harley truly couldn't stand. As for that polite Neville, who gave Harley a good impression, she hadn't discovered any academic talent in him either. As for the girls, Harley's other two roommates, Parvati and Lavender, most enjoyed discussing topics related to dressing up and makeup. Harley knew a lot about these topics, but she had only learned them in order to cope with high society and disguise herself. If she had a choice, Harley would much rather learn a few more occult rituals. Therefore, Hermione was still the most suitable person to befriend, as long as you could endure her incessant chattering. It's just like what Professor McGonagall said. Harley looked at Hermione with an innocent expression. It's very simple, I felt like I understood it as soon as I heard it. As she spoke, Harley slightly cupped her chin. If I really have to say, I expressed a very strong desire in my heart, wanting this matchstick to turn into a silver needle. And then it successfully transformed. Very good, Miss Potter. Professor McGonagall had walked over at some point. She looked at Harley, nodding with great satisfaction. This child had inherited her father's talent for transfiguration, and in this regard, was far superior to her father. You must know, even James hadn't succeeded in completely turning the matchstick into a silver needle on his first class. You have found the trick. Everyone, look, Miss Potter has succeeded. As she spoke, Professor McGonagall held the silver needle Harley had created up high, displaying it in front of everyone. Excellent, Miss Potter. You have successfully earned 15 points for Gryffindor, and you don't need to do the homework for this lesson. By the way, the homework is to practice this magic repeatedly and write a reflection report, detailing your possible reasons for failure. After class, Harley had originally wanted to stay behind to ask about some idealistic knowledge and quietly introduce some occult knowledge regarding the mental domain that she had snatched from the psychology alchemists, to see if Professor McGonagall had any different insights. However, considering that she was very likely still being watched by Dumbledore, Harley decided to proceed step by step, waiting until she had read more books in the library before asking. Time flew by until Friday, and the first thing in the morning was potion class. In the words of all Gryffindors, Professor Snape, who taught this subject, was the professor who hated Gryffindor the most. But Harley had a premonition that this Friday wouldn't be particularly bad. This premonition came true during breakfast. Harley received a letter from Hagrid, who was suspected to be a half-giant. This Hogwarts gamekeeper invited Harley to visit his hut this weekend and also expressed his deep regret that he should have been the one to pick up Harley initially. Harley naturally agreed with pleasure. After all, according to what the students said, Hagrid guarded the entire Forbidden Forest. If she could build a good relationship with him, many herbs would likely be easy to obtain. Just thinking about it was exciting. Chapter 20. Absolutely correct, 30 points to Gryffindor. Harley and Hermione walked all the way into the cold, damp classroom located in the basement and found a seat in the first row. Harley actually wanted to go to the very last row. After all, this professor looked slovenly, and one could assume he smelled quite unpleasant. And his strange gaze, which could stir Harley's spirituality, made Harley feel very uncomfortable. However, Hermione insisted on sitting in the first row, closest to the professor, saying it was best for listening to the professor's lecture. The bell for class rang, and Professor Snape strode into the classroom, his black robes billowing behind him. Moreover, Harley was astonished to discover that he had actually washed his hair. Professor Snape noticed Miss Potter in the first row at a glance and spotted the shock in her eyes. Professor Snape was extremely satisfied and nodded slightly. At the opening banquet, he had noticed that Harley's gaze was wrong when she looked at his hair, she seemed very disgusted. So he had specifically washed his hair before class today, and now it seemed the effect was very good. Professor Snape cleared his throat, took out the roll, and began to call the names. When he reached Harley, Professor Snape paused slightly, but quickly continued reading down the list. After closing the roll, Professor Snape began his opening remarks. "You are here to learn the precise science and strict craft of potion making." Professor Snape began to deliver his long-winded speech. Harley listened attentively, not wanting to miss a single word. Although she didn't think the professor would teach anything very profound right away, she still maintained an absolutely serious attitude to avoid losing the hope of restoring her strength. After Professor Snape finished his opening remarks, he surveyed the classroom and finally looked at Harley in front of him. He paused for a moment, complex emotions flashing in his eyes, and then said softly, "Miss Harley, if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood, what would I get?" Harley quickly stood up. "Report, Professor, asphodel root powder and wormwood added together can be made into a very potent sleeping potion, known as Draught of Living Death." Professor Snape's face showed a trace of a smile. "If I asked you to find me a bezoar, where would you look?" "Report, Professor, I would look in the stomach of a goat." "Miss Harley, tell me, what is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" This time Harley thought for a moment. After all, she remembered that these two types of aconite were quite different on the northern continent, but here they seemed slightly different. After recalling slightly, Harley answered again. "Report, Professor, they are the same plant, collectively known as aconite." Professor Snape nodded, squeezing out an obvious smile on his face, as if trying to prove he was very amiable. However, that smile might be more suitable for scaring people. "Miss Harley, no need to say, report, Professor, no need to be so respectful. Just speak to me in the tone you would use with a friend. I admire all students who are good at potions, especially students like you who seriously preview before school starts. You look like you have great talent in potions, Harley. If I were you, I would put all my energy into potions, because you will definitely become a potions master in the future. You really are very like. In short, Miss Harley, absolutely correct, 30 points to Gryffindor. Miss Harley, please sit down." This class was taken by Slytherin and Gryffindor together, and the classroom was full of Slytherin students. Now they all opened their mouths in surprise. Are we hallucinating? Professor Snape doesn't usually treat Gryffindor like this. According to the seniors, even if Gryffindor students answered all the questions Professor Snape asked correctly, they would still have points deducted for not adding, report, Professor, or for adding, report, Professor. Why is this Harley an exception? Why? Does Professor Snape not love Slytherin anymore? However, Professor Snape ignored the others and started lecturing on his own. Of course, rather than lecturing, Professor Snape actually just read the recipe once and then asked the students to practice. Potion class is a subject that focuses on practical operation. Professor Snape said loudly in the classroom. "I have to watch you operate with my own eyes to point out your mistakes. There is no other way." Saying this, Professor Snape tapped the blackboard with his wand, and a detailed potion recipe appeared on it. The students were divided into pairs by Professor Snape and began to mix and brew a simple potion to cure boils. Professor Snape walked around the classroom dragging his long black cloak, pointing out the students' mistakes. However, he seemed to often walk to the side of Harley and Hermione's group and stop to watch. "Miss Harley, when boiling horned slugs, the fire should be higher. Miss Harley, please make sure to grind the snake fangs into powder, the particles you ground are too big. Miss Harley, you should add a little more dried nettles here." The Slytherin students behind were all secretly laughing. As expected, this is the correct script. Professor Snape not finding trouble for Gryffindor, how could that be possible? Malfoy even laughed out loud without covering it up and said to Goyle beside him. "Look, that Potter doesn't look like she knows how to brew potions at all." "Shut up." Professor Snape turned around abruptly, staring fiercely at Malfoy. "Student Malfoy, do you think your operation is perfect? Have you finished brewing your potion?" Saying this, Professor Snape strode over, scooped up a large spoonful of potion with a transparent spoon, and held it high. Look, the finished potion at this time should be clear purple, why is yours a dirty blue? Professor, Malfoy stammered. I haven't finished brewing yet, I haven't added the snake fang powder yet. Indeed, Professor Snape said slowly in a cold voice. Mr. Malfoy, you haven't finished brewing, you haven't added the snake fang powder. But you have time to laugh at a girl here, to laugh at Miss Harley. Her attitude is 10,000 times more correct than yours. How do you have the face to laugh at her here? Hurry up and brew, otherwise don't think about passing this assignment. Malfoy was so wronged he was about to cry. This script was wrong. He looked at Harley's back with hatred. It's all because of you that Godfather is scolding me. Ron and Dean next to them were working together to brew the potion. Hearing Professor Snape's words, the two covered their mouths and snickered. Who said the professor hates Gryffindor? Look how righteous the professor is, teaching the Slytherin Malfoy a lesson. But soon they couldn't laugh anymore, because Professor Snape looked at them. Mr. Weasley, Mr. Thomas, is it funny that I scold others? Do you think you have done perfectly? Whispering in class, 10 points from Gryffindor. Chapter 21, Snape's Little Classroom. Harley genuinely believed that Professor Snape was perfectly suited for the provoker sequence of the Hunter pathway. His slow, sardonic voice made one feel as if a venomous snake was wrapped around them, hissing and flicking its tongue. In short, she really wanted to punch him. After berating Malfoy and deducting another round of points from Gryffindor, Professor Snape returned to the front row, satisfied, and continued to pretend to casually guide Harley. Miss Harley Potter, for this step, you might consider adding double the standard amount of powdered snake fangs. As Harley continued her work, Professor Snape suddenly spoke. But Professor Snape, the book doesn't say that, Hermione questioned. That's right, Professor Snape. What you said is different from the recipe you wrote on the blackboard and the one in the textbook. Harley held up the book in her hand and pointed to the steps on it. When he first heard Hermione's words, Professor Snape's face instinctively darkened. Talking back to a professor, Gryffindor will lose. At that moment, Harley's voice rang out just in time. 1 point. For having the courage to question and raise doubts, 5 points to Gryffindor. Professor Snape's attitude did a complete 180-degree turn, and he then patiently explained to Harley. This is an improved version of the recipe that I developed on my own. The effects are better after the modification. I think you should master this improved potion recipe. But Professor, Harley continued to ask, why does this happen? Does adding more powdered snake fangs better activate the medicinal properties of a certain herb? Or is it for some other reason? Professor Snape hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. Miss Harley Potter, this is content for higher grades, so I cannot explain it for now. But Professor Snape, I'm really very curious. Harley stared into Professor Snape's eyes, revealing an expression mixed with pleading and grievance. To strengthen her influence on Professor Snape's will, Harley even blinked, utilizing her witch's extraordinary abilities. Looking at Harley's watery, emerald green eyes, Professor Snape surrendered almost immediately. Professor Snape's lips did not move, but Harley felt his voice ring in her ears. Harley, being eager to learn and ask questions is a good habit. Since you are willing to ask questions, I am, of course, very happy to answer your doubts. How about this? Stay after class, and I will explain it to you separately. However, there is a lot of content, so I'm afraid I have to assign you some tasks first. You need to read more books before I can explain it to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't understand it even if you heard it. Harley nodded obediently. Thank you for the reminder, Professor. This caused Hermione to look at her in confusion. What did the professor remind her about? Professor Snape nodded in satisfaction, and just as he was about to say something, a series of noises suddenly came from behind. Hiss, 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 boom. From the back of the classroom, there first came a loud hissing sound, which then turned into a violent explosion. Harley and Professor Snape turned their heads at the same time, greeted by thick, green acidic smoke and potions flying everywhere. Professor Snape's eyes constricted, and he instinctively stood in front of Harley before reaching for his wand. But Harley was one step faster than Professor Snape. Harley raised her left hand, gave a light squeeze, and the temperature in the classroom plummeted, turning those flying potions into eerie frost. When all the frost fell to the ground, Harley clapped her hands. The frost dissipated, and the temperature in the classroom rose rapidly, though not by much. Although Harley reacted very quickly, many students who were close to Neville and Seamus were still affected. Several students had red, swollen boils all over their arms and legs, wailing in pain. Professor Snape also reacted, pointing his wand at the potion in Harley's cauldron, causing it to cool down rapidly. Then, these potions flew into the air and were poured onto the affected students. Well done, Miss Harley Potter. 10 points to Gryffindor for protecting your classmates. Professor Snape said loudly, then turned his head to look at Neville and Seamus, his kind expression turning unfriendly. If I'm not mistaken, you probably didn't take the cauldron off the fire before adding the porcupine quills, did you? The professor's eyes seemed to be burning with rage. But I cannot understand what kind of operation could cause the cauldron to explode so violently. Are you idiots? I wrote every step clearly on the blackboard, yet you still managed to come up with unknown operations and commit brand new mistakes. I couldn't even make this potion explode during the brewing process if I closed my eyes. 20 points from Gryffindor. Injured students, go to the school hospital again. After Professor Snape collected everyone's results, the class finally ended. Many students scrambled out of the potion classroom. Everyone finally fully experienced Professor Snape's ability to deduct points from Gryffindor in fancy ways. Although Harley had earned a total of 55 points for Gryffindor, Gryffindor's final total score had actually decreased by 5 points. Moreover, Harley had a feeling that Professor Snape was picking on the other Gryffindors. However, according to the principles of a witch, if it didn't concern her and she had no interest in it, she naturally wouldn't bother with it. Harley slowly packed up her cauldron and materials, occasionally tucking the hair that was blocking her vision behind her ears. Professor Snape appeared to be seriously evaluating the potions submitted by the students, but the corner of his eye was constantly darting around. Finally, everyone in the classroom had left. Hermione had also been sent away by Harley under the excuse that she had questions she didn't understand during class, so she wanted to stay behind to ask. Professor. Harley looked at the now empty classroom and called out crisply. Can you tell me which books I need to read in advance? By this time, Professor Snape had already put down the student assignments in his hand, and the classroom door had been closed at some unknown time. Professor Snape shook his hair and tapped the blackboard hard. A long list of book titles appeared on it. Detailed explanation of herbal properties, magical potions, Jin Gui Yao Lu. Professor Snape pointed to these books. These all belong to the more basic parts, explaining the medicinal properties of those herbs. Especially that, Jin Gui Yao Lu, the original text is in an ancient Eastern language and was written entirely by Muggles, but it also has great inspiration for wizards. Read these books as soon as possible, and only then can I give you a brief explanation. Harley, clutching the long book list, walked out of the classroom, satisfied. Of course, she was not interested in that potion for treating boils, but rather in the principles of medicinal properties. As long as she mastered the knowledge in this area, the hope of restoring the potions from the sequence pathway world would be one step greater. Harley decided to go to the library to borrow some books before going to find Hagrid in the afternoon. Anyway, Professor Snape had given Harley a signature, so Harley could borrow several books at once. Chapter 22, The Truly Wealthy. Around 3 in the afternoon, Harley returned the borrowed books to her dormitory. She politely declined Hermione, who wanted to invite her to stay in the library to read, and also turned down Lavender and Parvati, who invited her to watch the boys play wizard's chess. Afterwards, Harley went alone to Hagrid's residence, a small wooden hut located on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. While it was called a small wooden hut, considering Hagrid's height of 3.5 meters, the house really couldn't be called small. When Harley knocked on the door of the hut, a burst of barking sounded from inside. Then, Hagrid's booming voice rang out, "Back off, Fang." Following that, the door of the hut was opened. Hagrid's rugged, large face appeared behind the door. "Welcome, Harley," Hagrid said loudly. "The last time I saw you, you were just a little baby. Now you've grown into a big girl. You look just like your mother. Except for the color of your hair, which is more like your father's." Harley nodded silently. "Hello, Hagrid. Did you have something to ask me for today?" "Not really, just wanted to chat," Hagrid said, smiling as he scratched the back of his head. "Your parents and I were good friends back in the day, so I came to check on their child." As he spoke, Hagrid seemed to realize something and took 2 steps back. "Come in and talk, Harley. Come try my freshly baked rock cakes." Subsequently, the two entered the house and sat down. It is worth mentioning that Hagrid's chair was a bit high. After all, it was a chair custom made for his height of 3.5 meters. And Harley was only 1.40 meters tall, not even reaching Hagrid's waist. Fortunately, Harley possessed the light body movement techniques of an assassin, otherwise, she might not have been able to sit on the chair. Hagrid turned to prepare drinks and desserts for Harley, and incidentally asked, "Harley, would you like some tea? Or maybe some milk?" "A cup of sweet iced tea is fine," Harley answered subconsciously, then immediately realized, "No, I mean, some sweet black tea is fine." While Hagrid was preparing, Harley activated her spirit vision and looked around the hut. Upon entering this hut, Harley had sensed an extremely strong presence of spirituality in the surroundings. So, Harley subconsciously activated her spirit vision and was stunned by what she saw. Hagrid was truly extravagant. Wherever Harley looked, large quantities of materials were shining with spiritual radiance. The few bundles of dirty hair hanging from the ceiling had an especially strong concentration of spirituality, making them very suitable for crafting binding-type magical items. And the herbs in the bottles on Hagrid's windowsill and the various feathers in the baskets were clearly not ordinary objects. So far, Harley had already recognized human face roses, hornbeams, ball of yarn grass, and a whole bunch of other valuable materials. What does it mean to be rich? This is what it means to be rich. Hagrid is the truly wealthy one. Furthermore, she was surprised to discover that, if she wasn't mistaken, those few red feathers were tail feathers of a firestone bird, and the bottles next to them contained crystalline sunflowers and singing sunflowers. If she could find midsummer grass and elven dark leaves, and then concoct the 7-month wine sap herself, Harley could even create the potion for the sun pathway, sequence 9, Bard, right here. No, Harley shook her head silently, refuting her own thoughts. In that world of sequence pathways, it was because those plants contained Beander characteristics that they could be used to concoct corresponding sequence potions. But in this world, these plants might just look similar and probably don't contain the corresponding Beander characteristics, or perhaps the characteristics they contain are different. So, concocting them directly would likely only result in failure. But, what if they really could be concocted? If the firestone bird really exists in this world, does that mean the disaster reporting bird also exists? Is my path not truly broken? Is there still a chance for me to advance to a demoness of catastrophe? A strange color flashed in Harley's eyes, but in the end, everything returned to calm. Regardless, there was no opportunity to consider so much right now. She could only take it one step at a time. She also needed to finish reading those books Professor Snape assigned quickly. It was originally just an unintentional act, but she didn't expect Harley to really see hope. Hagrid soon brought over the rock cakes and black tea with a large amount of sugar added. However, after tasting one piece of rock cake, Harley rationally put down this thing that could be used as a brick. Hagrid began to talk loudly with Harley about her parents and repeatedly emphasized how similar Harley was to her mother. Harley smiled and kept responding, while quietly steering the conversation toward the various professors in the school, letting Hagrid introduce the abilities of these professors to her. Under Harley's constant responses, Hagrid's interest in chatting grew higher and higher. And Harley also increasingly liked chatting with this big guy, Hagrid, because his lips were really not tight, and important information would leak out from his words from time to time. Finally, it was getting dark outside, and Hagrid realized that he had been talking for too long. "It's getting late, Harley, I should take you back," Hagrid said, looking like he still had more to say. "You're welcome to come chat with me anytime." "Of course, I'd love to." Harley stood up, then pretended to look at the windowsill casually. "Hagrid, what are those things on your window?" "Oh, just some worthless little trinkets," Hagrid said with a wave of his large hand, dismissively. "They're all things I found in the Forbidden Forest, they're all worthless." Harley blinked, unable to tell for a moment whether Hagrid was showing off his wealth or if he really didn't know the value of these things. Then Hagrid, "Could you give me some? I really like potions, and Professor Snape has promised to teach me a bit more. But I'm afraid the money my parents left me won't be enough for practice," Harley said pitifully. Hagrid nodded repeatedly immediately. "Of course you can, Harley. You're really like your mom. She liked potions too. If you're missing any herbs, just come to me. You can basically find the vast majority of herbs in the Forbidden Forest." After a moment of thought, Hagrid waved his large hand. "Harley, I originally wanted to pick you up on July 31st, your birthday, but unfortunately, that job was eventually taken over by Professor Dumbledore. So, I haven't given you a birthday present yet. How about this, you pick some potion materials from my house as your birthday present." Harley suppressed the joy in her heart, thanked Hagrid obediently, and then selected the herbs that were most useful to her. Red-haired fir bark, and psychedelic grass. The psychedelic grass essential oil for the ritual is sorted. Wow, there's even poisonous violet. Now I can make at least 2 more magic mirrors. With only a wand, my means of self-preservation are still too monotonous. Harley scavenged a batch of materials and then left Hagrid's hut, feeling satisfied. Hagrid didn't care about this at all. Anyway, these materials were abundant in the Forbidden Forest, and they were useless to him here. If he could help Harley, Hagrid would naturally be incredibly happy. Chapter 23, Harley's Soaring Reputation. Life at Hogwarts was enjoyable for Harley. All the professors loved such a studious student who asked questions frequently, especially Professor Snape. He had praised Harley in public more than once, not hiding his favoritism toward her at all. Once, when Harley went to ask a question after class, Professor Snape even told her directly that once her study progress improved a little more, she could join his private potion club. Harley was naturally very much looking forward to it. After all, through this period of study, Harley discovered that Professor Snape's level was truly high. For many potion recipes in the textbook, Professor Snape offered different preparation methods, and the resulting potion had better effects. The many potion journals collected in the library, with papers bearing Professor Snape's name, also powerfully proved this. Professor Snape was one of the top potions masters in the world. Teaching students was completely his side job. Or perhaps, Professor Snape was willing to come and teach students just to see that kind of clear-eyed stupidity in their eyes. Harley even sincerely hoped that a top potions master like Professor Snape could take her as his successor. After all, Harley hadn't been strong in potion preparation before, and her arcane knowledge in this area desperately needed improvement. However, to avoid seeming too presumptuous, Harley did not bring this up to Professor Snape proactively. The professors liked Harley, and the student body didn't dislike her either. Although Harley had excellent grades like Hermione, that was the only similarity. Hermione only liked to soak in the library, but Harley could chat with other girls about topics like makeup and clothing coordination. Hermione would only lecture the boys who made noise, but Harley could reach an agreement with them on many topics and was willing to learn from them how to play wizard's chess and exploding snap. Coupled with the fact that Harley was willing to lend her finished homework and notes to other classmates, she had friendly relationships with almost everyone among the more than 100 little wizards in the first year. Only one person didn't like her, and that was Mr. Malfoy of Slytherin. From the train when school started, Malfoy had found Harley an eyesore. After all, his dear godfather, Professor Snape, had reprimanded him in class many times just because he gave Harley trouble. This made Malfoy very angry. Hadn't he just sarcastically remarked that Harley's eyes looked like pickled toads? Why did Professor Snape have to give him detention, all the way until Halloween? Malfoy attributed all of this to Harley and swore that he must find an opportunity to get revenge. He prepared to put this opportunity into the flying class. After all, no one could be perfect. Harley was so excellent in other aspects, so she couldn't possibly be talented at flying too. The flying class was finally about to begin, but Gryffindor had to have class with the Slytherin students on Thursday. So most people found it hard to judge whether this was good news or bad news. However, the fun of the flying class itself could probably dissipate the annoyance of having class with people they disliked. After all, many students had joyful expressions on their faces. Harley could be said to be very interested in the flying class. After all, the witch pathway had no ability to fly. As a powerhouse of the witch pathway, if one wanted to fly without corresponding magical items, one had to advance to sequence 2, Demoness of Catastrophe, and then rely on creating disasters related to wind to barely achieve the purpose of flight. Moreover, this kind of flight could not be used for long distances or long periods, because this was essentially creating a disaster regarding wind, a forceful attack method rather than a means of movement. And Harley had never experienced flight. After all, such magical items were rare. The time she killed the ocean songster was perhaps the closest Harley had ever come to a flight-type magical item. However, that Beander characteristic was sold by Harley to the captain of a ghost ship. After all, Harley didn't have the money to find an artisan. And the furthest Harley had ever been from the ground was when she used the spider silk ability obtained from sequence 6 to hang in midair and kite a weapons master of the warrior pathway. Therefore, Harley very much hoped she could learn to fly and obtain her own means of flight. Being able to fly was really too important. Time flew to Thursday afternoon, and the highly anticipated flying class began. The professor for the flying class was Madame Hooch. She had short gray hair, and her yellow eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. Madame Hooch was very cautious and explained many times before allowing the students to start practicing. Madame Hooch had taught many batches of students and must have experienced many accidents caused by Gryffindor and Slytherin having class together. That was why she was so careful, demonstrating multiple times and checking the students' movements one by one to see if they were correct. But despite all precautions, Madame Hooch had accounted for the students being mischievous, but she hadn't expected them to have operational errors. When Madame Hooch asked the students to mount their brooms, Neville, because he was too nervous, flew straight up high towards the sun. "Child, come back," Madame Hooch shouted from behind, but Harley felt she was doing useless work. Judging from Neville's trembling legs and his tight grip on the broom, not daring to let go. He would rather stay on the ground, it was just that the broom wasn't listening to him. Finally, because Neville couldn't control the broom, he was thrown off from the sky by the violent broom and planted headfirst onto the ground. Madame Hooch ran over quickly, her face was as pale as Neville's. After briefly checking Neville's injuries, Madame Hooch chose to send Neville to the school hospital. Before leaving, Madame Hooch warned them repeatedly not to touch the brooms. Unfortunately, the students didn't seem prepared to listen. As soon as the professor left, Malfoy burst into loud laughter. "Did you see his face? That big fool," as expected of the stupid Gryffindor. While speaking, he kept glancing at Harley with mocking eyes, seemingly trying to provoke her. The other Slytherin students echoed, and several people laughed out loud. Hearing Slytherin's mockery of Gryffindor, the little wizards of Gryffindor naturally wouldn't let themselves be bullied. Ron retorted directly, "You should thank Neville, because he gave you the chance to stay on the ground. Otherwise, the truth that you can't ride a broom would have been exposed." "Weasley, what do you mean?" Malfoy hadn't managed to provoke others, but he was provoked himself. "I think it's you who can't ride a broom, right?" "That's right, the Weasley family is so poor they can't even afford the bristles of a broom, so they have no chance to ride one at all. Unlike our family, we collect one of every newly produced broom." Ron seemed to have been poked in a sore spot, he stopped talking and lunged directly at Malfoy. For little wizards, using fists was always more useful than using those few unskilled hexes. Malfoy had long wanted to take revenge for the train ride. Although he hadn't managed to draw fire onto Harley, cleaning up a redhead from the Weasley family first was also a good choice. "Crabbe, Goyle, get him." Malfoy waved his hand, "Teach the idiots of Gryffindor a lesson." How could the Gryffindor classmates endure this when they saw it? The Slytherin students were stepping all over them. "Then let's fight." Anyway, Gryffindor fighting Slytherin was politically correct, and even if injured, one could brag about it for 2 years. Chapter 24, Pre-Prepared Anchor. And so, a chaotic brawl between Gryffindor and Slytherin inexplicably broke out. Students from the two houses were fighting in a mass, and many who weren't directly involved were cheering them on from the sidelines. Only Hermione was trying hard to break up the fight, repeatedly telling everyone they were breaking school rules and would be punished if they continued. But it was no use. The Slytherin students obviously wouldn't pay attention to a Muggle-born witch, not dragging her into the brawl was already an act of gentlemanly conduct. The Gryffindor students also felt that Hermione not joining them against Slytherin was politically incorrect and made her a traitor to Gryffindor, so they ignored her too. Harley watched the battlefield with a confused look, even wondering if she had accidentally triggered her ability to incite conflict. Otherwise, how could a brawl between Gryffindor and Slytherin have broken out so inexplicably? The brawl between the two houses showed results almost as soon as it began. Many boys personally verified that fists were more useful than curses, or at least the damage was more direct. Everyone was more or less covered in bruises and footprints, and some people even had bloody noses. Malfoy, the catalyst of the conflict, did not join the brawl. Just kidding, he was the heir to the noble house of Malfoy, how could he engage in such low-class behavior? His battle should be fought with a wand in hand, defeating his enemy elegantly amidst thunderous applause. Malfoy decided to directly provoke Harley, forcing her to accept his challenge, and then defeat her in front of everyone. He mounted his broom, flew up rapidly, and shouted at the top of his lungs in midair, "Potter! Dare to come up here and face me. As long as you can catch this ball, I'll return the ball to that big oaf. If you can't catch it, I'll throw this ball into a tree. He is from your Gryffindor, you wouldn't mind that, would you?" While shouting, Malfoy kept tossing a shiny ball in his hand. Malfoy's voice drew the attention of most people. Students immediately recognized that what Malfoy held was the Remembrall Neville had just received this morning, a gift from his grandmother. Harley sighed helplessly and took her hand out of her pocket. She had originally intended to step in and restrain the Slytherin students, but now, Harley chose to grab a broom nearby. Although Malfoy's actions disrupted Harley's plans, it seemed this unexpected event could also be steered in a favorable direction. Harley prepared to swiftly suppress Malfoy. After all, he was just provoking like a child. Suppressing him couldn't even be described as defeating him. Then Harley would turn back to control the other Slytherins, further completing her goal, promoting her own image and creating an anchor. Using various materials obtained from Hagrid, Harley easily concocted a bottle of Singer potion that very night. The next day was Saturday. That evening, Harley caught a rabbit at the edge of the Forbidden Forest and fed it the expensive Singer potion. The rabbit lost control on the spot and was killed directly by Harley, and it even precipitated a Beander characteristic, proving it was a legitimate potion. This test confirmed one thing for Harley: there were materials in this world that could be used to formulate potions, so there was a high probability that Harley could continue to advance. Therefore, for the sake of her future, Harley had to start considering creating an anchor. Before becoming an earthly angel, the corruption contained in Beander characteristics could not interfere with a demigod, as a demigod's will was strong enough and the divinity contained was not particularly high. But even so, after becoming a Sequence 3, Harley felt signs of losing control occasionally. After all, the witch pathway was one of the craziest pathways and one of the most likely to lose control. Fortunately, after Harley completed the acting of the demoness of Unaging, she was quickly forced to seal her strength and return to the wizarding world, so the possibility of losing control disappeared for the time being. However, since there was hope for further advancement, Harley naturally had to start creating anchors for herself. So during this time, Harley had been cultivating an image of a student with good grades who didn't strictly follow the rules and was willing to get along with her classmates. This way, teachers would like her very much, and classmates wouldn't have any bad impressions of her. Combined with Harley's own popularity, she had unknowingly become the leader of the first-year Gryffindors. At least most people were willing to listen to her. Therefore, Harley needed to step in and handle this matter to further consolidate her good image. Seeing that Harley had already mounted her broom, Malfoy sneered, "Potter. You don't think a wizard raised by muggles like you can beat me at riding a broom, do you?" As he spoke, Malfoy kept circling in the air, using crude gestures to provoke Harley, wanting to further enrage her and make her lose her composure. Harley smiled slightly, ignoring Hermione's advice of, "Don't be impulsive, you'll be expelled," and took off directly, even waving to the students below. The students who had been cheering earlier all turned their gazes to the air, and many of those who were brawling also stopped and looked up at the sky. In the hearts of the first-year students, this was a battle between the leaders of both sides. Malfoy showed off his superb flying skills, steering his broom to constantly change direction, circling wantonly around Harley while laughing loudly. Harley initially didn't want to let him be so arrogant and was prepared to use the witch's frost to end the farce as quickly as possible. However, in the end, Harley didn't choose to do so, but chose to ride her broom to chase him. Defeating the opponent in the same field would undoubtedly gain more prestige. Moreover, Harley suddenly discovered that she seemed to be very talented at riding a broom. This undoubtedly gave Harley more confidence in her plan. She had originally prepared to use extraordinary charm to interfere with Malfoy if she couldn't resolve the battle quickly. Now it seemed that wasn't necessary for the time being. After an aerial pursuit, Malfoy's movement patterns had been completely mastered by Harley. No matter where Malfoy flew, he would be easily blocked by Harley. Malfoy seemed to get desperate and threw the ball high into the air. "Potter. If you have the ability, catch that ball." Harley glanced at Malfoy with a look that said he was an idiot. Flipping the chessboard when you can't play. Is this what a qualified leader should do? Oh, right, forgot that Malfoy was just an 11-year-old child and wasn't consciously creating an anchor. While distracted by her thoughts, Harley easily caught the ball while riding her broom. A cheer erupted from below. The Gryffindor students were applauding desperately, while the Slytherin students' expressions were somewhat unpleasant. Through her divinity, Harley vaguely felt a trace of spirituality and couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Sure enough, her choice was correct. This action had gained Harley a large batch of anchors, and perhaps they could even be converted into believers in the future. Chapter 25. Hello, is this 999? There's a pervert here. After retrieving Neville's Remembrow, Harley casually pulled out her wand and pointed it at the ground. Crabbe and Goyle, who were still brawling with Ron, Dean, and the others, had their feet frozen instantly, and were then pinned to the ground. Seeing this, the other Slytherin students wanted to continue, hoping to save face, but a voice suddenly rang out. "Stop. Everyone stop at once." Professor McGonagall strode over, her face a mix of shock and anger. Professor McGonagall stopped in her tracks and then asked loudly, "What are you doing?" "If I recall correctly, this should be the flying class taught by Madam Hooch. I saw you fighting from my office. And Miss Potter." Professor McGonagall stared into Harley's eyes. "How dare you be so bold? If I recall correctly, this is your first time riding a broomstick. You could break your neck." Harley spoke her prepared excuse without hesitation. "But Professor, Malfoy insulted Gryffindor. He tarnished the honor of Gryffindor and bullied a Gryffindor student." As she spoke, Harley retold the events with almost no attempt to hide anything. Of course, her own motives were certainly hidden, and besides, no one knew her true intentions anyway. The Gryffindor students listened to Harley's account and nodded repeatedly. The Slytherin students wanted to object, but everything Harley said was the truth. Moreover, Professor McGonagall had witnessed part of what happened, so the Slytherins couldn't argue and could only nod in admission. After listening to Harley, Professor McGonagall's anger subsided slightly. Although Professor McGonagall was always fair, she was still biased toward Gryffindor in her heart. Hearing that one of her most admired students had broken school rules to protect the honor of Gryffindor in a fellow student, Professor McGonagall was secretly pleased. However, admiration was one thing, but necessary punishments could not be omitted. A silver light emitted from Professor McGonagall's wand and shot toward the castle. Subsequently, Professor McGonagall looked at the crowd. I do not have the authority to punish Slytherin students, so I have already notified Professor Snape. 50 points from Gryffindor. Everyone who participated in the fight will serve 1 month of detention. I will have Filch assign you tasks. Miss Potter, you do not need to go. Professor McGonagall turned to look at Harley. You do not need to find Filch, I will arrange your detention personally. Harley let out a silent sigh of relief in her heart. She knew that inequality breeds resentment. If she hadn't been punished this time, it would have brought about negative consequences. This was an influence Harley did not want to see, as it might shake her anchor in the future. Fortunately, Professor McGonagall was still as strict and impartial as ever, punishing even her favorite student. Miss Potter, Professor McGonagall looked at the silent crowd once more, then turned to Harley, please come with me. Professor McGonagall strode toward the castle, and Harley followed behind, waving to the Gryffindor students and offering a comforting smile. Harley was in a very good mood. The more severe Professor McGonagall's punishment was, the more the Gryffindor students would respect and support her. However, Harley seemed to have guessed wrong. Professor McGonagall wasn't there to punish her, but had summoned the captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Thus, Harley was inexplicably invited to join the Gryffindor Quidditch team. However, this seemed to be a good thing, as Quidditch was the most important large-scale sport in the wizarding world and the most popular competition. So, Harley naturally agreed with pleasure. Your father would be proud of you. Professor McGonagall looked at Harley, a smile blooming on her face. He was an excellent Quidditch player in his day. When Harley left Professor McGonagall's office, it was already quite late, so Harley did not return to the dormitory and headed straight for the Great Hall. As soon as Harley entered the Great Hall, she felt the atmosphere was off. The moods in the Great Hall were distinctly different. The atmosphere around the Slytherin table was oppressive, many were silent, their faces grim. Upon learning that the cause of the incident was Malfoy provoking Harley, Professor Snape had mercilessly deducted 50 points from Malfoy alone, and another 10 points from the rest of the Slytherins. To those older Slytherin students, this was incredibly shameful. Not only were points deducted, but they had also lost to Gryffindor. Slytherin had lost all face. But the area around the Gryffindor table was a scene of pure joy, with everyone beaming. Although many Gryffindors, like the Slytherins, had to serve detention and had been deducted a full 50 points by Professor McGonagall. But this point deduction had been traded for a massive Gryffindor victory over Slytherin. Well done, Potter. Harley, you did great. Many students crowded around, including older students who were not very familiar with Harley. Angelina, who had introduced the professors to Harley at the opening banquet, slapped Harley's shoulder hard and gave her a warm hug. A truly beautiful victory, Harley. Even Percy, who always cared deeply about points and school rules, strode over to Harley's side to congratulate her. Well done, Harley. Although many points were deducted, don't worry, we will earn them back. As long as we slapped the faces of that bunch of annoying Slytherins, these points were worth losing. Harley nodded without shyness, thanking everyone for their enthusiasm, while modestly stating that she was only fighting for the honor of Gryffindor. Thus, the atmosphere around the Gryffindor table reached a climax once again. Many older students even began to acknowledge in their hearts that Harley was the king of Gryffindor. Perhaps the only person in the entire Gryffindor house who wasn't happy was Hermione. She sat beside Harley, nagging her repeatedly about how she shouldn't have broken the rules and caused Gryffindor to lose points, while constantly calculating how long it would take to earn them back. Harley wasn't angry. After all, she knew her best friend's personality very well. But the other Gryffindor students around weren't pleased. Because Harley was there, they didn't say anything outright, but their expressions were not very pleasant. Harley noticed this but could only sigh silently. Hermione's personality, which was even more stubborn and righteous than those arbitrators, was probably something only she could tolerate. That evening, an extra celebration was held in the Gryffindor common room. After crowdfunding, the Weasley twins brought back a pile of sweets and drinks, and also mysteriously carried 2 large bags. Harley was curious about how they managed that and decided she must find out when she had the chance. After the celebration had been going on for a long time, Fred opened one of the bags, which was filled with a large number of streamer crackers. Consequently, a rain of streamers drifted down from the ceiling of the Gryffindor common room. Amidst the atmosphere filled with streamers, George pulled a large bouquet of roses from the other bag, knelt on one knee before Harley, and said dramatically, "Great Lion Queen, please accept this bouquet symbolizing Britain," and led Gryffindor to victory over Slytherin forever. Harley was still chatting with senior Alicia Spinnet about the Gryffindor Quidditch team when she suddenly became the center of attention. Harley's mouth twitched. She felt that this scene was a bit off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what was wrong. "Hello. Is this 999? There's a pervert here." For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.